It goes without saying that the SCP Foundation archives are filled with some terrifying monsters. Even the deadliest creatures can, in theory, be defeated, or at least soundly avoided. After all, they're just flesh and blood, or in some cases, metal or concrete. But what if reality as you know it one day just broke? Or worse, you were transported to a reality so frightening and alien to our own that death seemed like the only escape, but you couldn't even give yourself that. This brings us to today's topic, the terrifying alternate reality of SCP-3001. The Foundation is no stranger to freaky alternate dimensions, but what was experienced by Joint Lead Researcher Dr. Robert Scranton at Site-120 is a truly unique nightmare. Co-managed by his wife, Dr. Anna Lang, Site-120 is a facility largely designated for research into SCPs with dangerous reality warping capabilities in order to mitigate future containment breaches. Reality warpers are among some of the more perplexing and dangerous SCPs, from the pocket dimension creating SCP-106 to the SCP creating Dr. Wondertainment and everything in between. Scranton and Lang's goal to further study such entities was an admirable one, if a little overambitious. And on January 2, 2000, during the testing of a new technology created by the Foundation's leading power couple, disaster finally struck. Scranton and Lang had already been the brains behind one of the Foundation's most valuable tools in the fight against reality-bending SCPs, the Scranton Reality Anchors. Their follow-up, the Lang-Scranton Stabilizer, or LSS, likely would have been an even more advanced variant of their earlier invention, and should have been a huge success for the team. But things didn't turn out that way. Dr. Scranton and several other researchers were gathered in Reality Lab A performing routine tests on the LSS prototypes. While other technicians ran diagnostics tests, Scranton stood at the control panel, the blinking red light above the console confirming that everything was going according to plan. But as anyone who's fallen victim to one of the Foundation's many anomalies will tell you, just because you've done everything correctly doesn't mean you're safe. Scranton began operating the machine, not knowing that something was rumbling up towards him from below. Without warning, a sudden, unexpected burst of seismic activity rocked the entire base. Researchers grabbed onto whatever was closest as the world shook around them. In his panic, Dr. Scranton clung to the LSS control panel as the seismic blast fried the circuits and kicked it into overdrive. There was a blast of magnificent blinding light, and when the rumbling stopped, not only was the doctor gone, he had been erased from reality as we know it. The earthquake had caused a deadly malfunction in the machine meant to stabilize reality, and instead tore a rift in it, dragging the unfortunate doctor and the control panel into oblivion. His wife, Dr. Lang, and the many researchers who idolized him were devastated by his unexpected demise at the hand of what should have been his crowning achievement. The one silver lining was that this reality-ripping event had almost definitely eliminated the doctor quickly and painlessly. As far as the Foundation and his loved ones were concerned, Scranton's death had been immediate and complete, a luxury afforded to few Foundation employees who die anomalous deaths. But sadly, that isn't how Dr. Scranton's story, or the story of SCP-3001, ends. No, this is where it all begins. How do we know all this? In the hellish new place where Scranton had been transported, the control panel from the LSS that he'd been clinging to for dear life had been transported with him, and continued to record audio data from this anomalous location. Not that Dr. Scranton realized it, not at first anyway. As far as he knew, he'd suddenly been transported into a pitch-black location. No sights, no sounds, no sense. True nothingness. At first, the doctor was confused. One second he was testing out his new technology, and the next he was quite literally nowhere. In spite of his current situation, the doctor was still an intelligent and rational man. He took a moment to compose himself, hoping that in time his eyes would adjust to the new darkness around him. But that moment never came. The darkness remained perfectly absolute. Much like the darkness in another reality-defying SCP, the deadly endless staircase known as SCP-087, the dark seemed thick, almost like you could touch it. The doctor, not wanting to give himself to despair and die in this impossible place, and with no other options seemingly available, began walking. Either he'd find his way out, or the Foundation would find him. No need to panic. It may have altered the doctor's temperament if he knew that the Foundation already assumed he was dead, and that no search party was going to come looking for him. Still, logic dictates that if a person walks for long enough, they're bound to find something. The problem Scranton was about to face was that SCP-3001 doesn't run by any kind of conventional logic. He walked and walked and walked, but he didn't seem to get any nearer to or farther from anything. But how could he even know? After all, in total darkness, there aren't any landmarks to assist in navigation. The doctor walked and paced and screamed for days on end, but he made no progress. He was alone in an empty world. He had no choice though, so he kept walking and walking and walking for 11 days. During that time, he felt his hunger and thirst grow. He was in terrible pain from a mix of starvation and dehydration, but the release of death didn't seem to come for him. He was going to have to learn the rules of this new place the hard way, and it grimly dawned on Dr. Scranton that dying in this place might not even be the worst possible outcome. He paced and repeated facts to himself, hoping to ground himself in the moment and avoid the panic that could so easily set in. Name, Robert Scranton. Age, 39. Birthday, September 19th, 1961. Favorite color, blue. Favorite song, Living on a Prayer. Wife, Anna. Little by little, the words seemed to turn to nonsense in his mouth as the terror grew. Just as he felt like he was about to lose his mind, he noticed something. A small oasis in the endless darkness of SCP-3001. The glowing red light on the LSS control panel. Where had it come from? And how was it still recording? The doctor had no idea, but he was grateful for any kind of familiarity in this strange darkness around him. Perhaps the LSS could be the key to saving him, or at least figuring out what on earth was going on here. Whatever the case, there was no denying that having the panel here was better than nothing. At least, when it was found, if it was ever found, then people would know what had happened to him. As the days passed and he continued to mysteriously survive, Dr. Scranton deduced that one didn't need food or water to survive continually in SCP-3001. The location had an anomalous effect on its inhabitants. As the days passed and turned to weeks of wandering in the darkness, Dr. Scranton further deduced that he was no longer in his home dimension. This was an entirely separate pocket dimension, much like the one possessed by SCP-106, but featureless, a perfect self-contained void. Now dimly illuminated by the red light of the panel, Dr. Scranton explored further into the void around him. He traveled for months on end, the pain of his deficiencies growing by the day, but found he was getting nowhere. All things considered, he wasn't even sure he was moving, or whether reality and darkness were swirling around him like a thick liquid. Rather than walking on a single flat surface, he was moving in all directions across a three-dimensional plane. The space-time continuum appeared to be entirely broken here, where movement is more defined by the conscious intention to move than any real geographical repositioning. Dr. Scranton knew that this place broke every single one of Kijel's laws of reality parameters. And from his years working with a plethora of reality warpers in Site-120, he had a theory for why this pocket dimension was so strange. It had an extraordinarily weak Hume field. Before we get back to Dr. Scranton's semi-living nightmare, we need a quick primer on Hume theory and why having a weak Hume field is such a problem. A Hume is a unit of measurement for the strength and amount of reality in a given location or being. In an area with an incredibly low Hume field relative to our world, such as SCP-3001, universe breaches and anomalous incidents rise significantly. At the time of his being trapped there, SCP-3001 had the lowest number of Humes in any recorded environment, making it a phenomenally anomalous zone. It was for this reason that starvation and dehydration never took hold of him despite causing him great pain. And the worst by far was yet to come. Dr. Scranton wasn't trapped in this dimension for weeks or even months. He was trapped in the darkness for years, and it took a nightmarish toll on his body and mind. The small flashing red light on his LSS control panel became his only friend, and as the years drew on, he would hold entire conversations with his only source of illumination. He knew that his days were numbered. If he didn't escape the dimension within around 3 years, the Hume field would diffuse further, and he would be left in a truly horrific state. But based on how little headway he'd made in the time he'd been there, he didn't feel optimistic. He kept speaking into the recorder, if only to break the silence and prevent him from going completely insane. But even that would only hold it off for so long. Alone and talking to himself endlessly in the darkness, Dr. Scranton could feel his mind slipping as the confines of the pocket dimension constricted and his body began to change. The low Hume field slowly diffused his physical matter, destroying the physical integrity of his body, but never being merciful enough to actually let him die. In his haunting audio logs, the doctor described his hands as diffusing and thinning out like spiderwebs. Over time, there was less and less of him, and what was left wasn't entirely human. As Scranton's Hume level lowered to equalize with that of SCP-3001, the lines between his body and the LSS control console began to blur in a twisted marriage of warped flesh and machine. The Lang-Scranton stabilizer was anything but stable. Before his mind and body became something else entirely, the doctor still had the presence of mind to finally realize how he'd come to be in this terrible place. The LSS had opened a wormhole known as a Class C broken entry into a paradoxical pocket dimension between layers of reality and taken him through it. He'd slipped through a crack in reality into absolute darkness, and now he was stuck with a fate far worse than death. How do we know any of this? Much like the event in the first place, it's a total accident. Testing superior reality-bending technology almost 6 years after the disappearance caused the sudden return of the missing LSS to Site-120's reality labs. The only trace of Dr. Scranton that it brought back with it was the blood and viscera that coated the console, much to the abject horror of his still-grieving wife, Dr. Anna Lang. To this day, Dr. Scranton, formerly one of the Foundation's brightest minds, remains trapped in the nightmare of SCP-3001. His current condition, whether the Doctor is still alive after 20 years of being warped by the low Hume field of 3001's darkened confines, is still unknown. But for the Doctor's own sake, we hope he's been dead for quite some time, because few things on Earth are as horrifying as the alternative.
What's in a name? Ancient folklore and fairy tales sometimes tell of the importance of names, that they can hold the power to summon or banish. Whether you buy into the superstition or not, you'd be unwise to ignore the power a name can have, especially if you ever dare to venture into SCP-4000. Why? Use your own name too many times in this extra-dimensional forest, and you may find that what walks out isn't you at all. At least once a year, the Foundation leads an expedition into SCP-4000 to explore this Keter-class dimension. But if you go down to those woods today, then you'd better follow the rules. Remember, the Foundation has implemented these guidelines for your own safety, and it's in your best interests to follow them. First and foremost, when referencing anything inside SCP-4000, be it a person, place, or thing, you cannot, under any circumstances, use names or titles. Communication is key when exploring SCP-4000, and making use of specific descriptors will deter any adverse effects on your journey. For example, you may want to refer to the location of SCP-4000 as the woods where you need to speak carefully, an apt description for such a place. Of course, there is a reason the Foundation doesn't provide a handy flashcard of alternative descriptors for any personnel taking part in the annual mission into SCP-4000. Nothing found there can be referred to with any consistent name, so it's perhaps advisable to look over a thesaurus and expand your vocabulary before visiting SCP-4000, as you'll need to come up with a lot of different ways to refer to the people and creatures around you. But don't worry, the Foundation will be able to train you how to properly refer to SCP-4000 in both written and verbal communication. In a similar vein, the second rule states that no personnel member should respond to their own name while in SCP-4000. Naturally, you and your fellow expedition team will not be alone in the forest you find yourselves in. The denizens of SCP-4000 are perpetually mutating creatures, some appearing to be trustworthy while others are hostile. It is for personnel members' own safety that no consistent names or titles are used to refer to each other in conversation. This has been known to cause personnel returning from SCP-4000 to experience vivid hallucinations, and in some instances has led to the appearances of creatures found in SCP-4000 in our world. Thirdly, when interacting with the life forms residing in SCP-4000, personnel are advised to accept any gifts that they're offered, but are warned to, under no circumstances, consume anything that is given to them while inside the forest. Finally, and above all, do not divulge any name, nickname, codename, alias, or any other personal designation when interacting with any native entities, and disregard any designator that an inhabitant of SCP-4000 attempts to assign to you. Personnel must, however, remain courteous in the presence of any native creature of SCP-4000 and treat these entities with respect and formality. Access to SCP-4000 can only be achieved by performing Procedure 4000 Halloway, a ritual requiring a steady flame in an indoor fireplace fueled by only organic kindling. Personnel are required to combine the powdered bones of one male lion, one male red fox, and a baleen whale, and cast these into the fire with a personal possession holding strong sentimental value to the staff member performing 4000 Halloway. Next, personnel are to add 3 feathers of a bird, such as a raven or crow, and must respond with the correct counter phrases once the fire begins to emit a voice. If these conditions are met and the correct response is given, Foundation personnel will gain access to the entry point of SCP-4000. If any error is made during the course of performing Procedure 4000 Halloway, then under no circumstances should this ritual be repeated. Staff are urged to apologize for any incorrect actions, then refrain from engaging in this procedure in the future. Should Procedure 4000 Halloway be completed successfully, Foundation personnel will find themselves arriving in the access point to SCP-4000, emerging from the mouth of an old well in the center of the forest. Exploration teams sent into SCP-4000 are advised that this dimension does not adhere to the laws of physical space that personnel will be accustomed to. There is a single, confirmed safe route that must be used when traversing the forest of SCP-4000, a dirt path leading in a circuit both beginning and terminating at the entry point. Previous attempts to map the landscape of SCP-4000 all confirm that the only way to safely exit this dimension is to follow the entire length of the path in one direction until eventually returning to the well. You have been warned. Any attempt to travel back to the direction you came in will result in a loss of contact with the rest of the expedition team. As mentioned, SCP-4000 is home to a number of entities, often noted to be undergoing continuous and dramatic changes in form. These physiological mutations appear to occur whenever these creatures are unobserved, making distinguishing between them difficult. When questioned about the exact nature of these changes, the inhabitants of SCP-4000 claim to have no control over them and express distress and dissatisfaction when said changes occur. Guidelines have been put in place by the Foundation regarding the interactions between personnel and creatures found in the forest, and adhering to the rules regarding the use of consistent names and titles remains vitally important. The native creatures appear semi-humanoid and are reported to be highly temperamental. Should any staff member happen to offend one of these natives, they may be subjected to anything from verbal assault to acts of extreme physical violence from the SCP-4000 resident. If any Foundation personnel further question why there are so many rules when visiting SCP-4000, then they need to look no further than the discoveries and fate of Dr. Eugene Japers, who during his initial expedition to SCP-4000 in 2005 encountered a humanoid native entity whose head resembled a rabbit's. As the pair shared a polite conversation, the rabbit-like creature made an inquiry regarding Dr. Japers' name, asking, "How is your name?" Keeping to the rules, Dr. Japers did not divulge any name or other form of title to the creature at this time. However, Japers remained courteous and polite during the interaction. The rabbit responded with the following: "Are you simple? I'm merely asking how your name is. My name has smelt of raspberries lately, I think, or snapdragons perhaps. It's so hard to tell these days, but one makes an effort." In his reply, Dr. Japers made a reference to his own name as having tasted rather tart as of late, before concluding the conversation with the rabbit entity. Upon returning to the SCP-4000 forest 3 years later, Dr. Japers was met with the same creature and once again engaged in conversation with it. After briefly discussing their previous encounter, Dr. Japers was able to turn their exchange towards something the rabbit had mentioned before, about finding it difficult to describe his own name. When asked to clarify this point, the rabbit replied, "I can only assume it's because of how long we've been apart, my name and I, that is. It's a good name, a proud name, I'm fairly sure. By this point though, it's probably decayed from its former grandeur, if it even still exists." After this mention of its relationship with its own name, it should be noted that the rabbit referred to Dr. Japers by the title Fellow Scholar. The third and final encounter between Dr. Japers and this entity came in 2013, after the doctor was sent into SCP-4000 with instructions to conduct a more thorough interview with the subject. It was during their third conversation that the Rabbit Man revealed details of a long-forgotten war between human beings and the residents of SCP-4000. Apparently, these creatures, the Fae, do not originate from the forest in which they now reside, and according to the Rabbit Man's claims, were born in our world. "Much as it grieves me to say, we were betrayed," the rabbit explained. "We had fought side by side, in the war against that factory. We had done nothing but help them, and what did they do? They destroyed us. They took so many of our lives and all of our names. Some of us fled here when the war was just beginning, but not many, not many. Still though, I don't hate them. It has been assumed by some that the Foundation was directly involved in whatever may have wiped out the Fae, causing them to either retreat or be banished to the forest of SCP-4000. An additional assumption has been made that whatever weapons were used on these creatures is directly responsible for their constantly shifting state, rendering them without their own names or identities. Whatever the case may be, it was during their conversation that Dr. Japers, in reference to their second encounter, referred to himself as a fellow scholar to the rabbit in order to coax information from him. However, in doing so, the doctor had unwittingly accepted the title that the native entity had given him. By mistakenly responding to the name fellow scholar, the doctor had broken the rules of interacting with the creatures of SCP-4000, an easy mistake, but a costly one. The doctor would later leave SCP-4000, traversing the safe path back to the well, and Dr. Japers vanished shortly after his exit from SCP-4000. His whereabouts are currently unknown. The Foundation has made several attempts to investigate his untimely disappearance, but to this day, he remains missing, and the fur left on the inside of his expedition gear displayed no strange properties. The single goal, it would seem, of the creatures residing in SCP-4000 is the theft of names. However, this naturally extends far beyond the Dimension's definition of identity theft. Though an unfortunate blunder, Dr. Japers allowed the friendly nature and demeanor of the rabbit entity to trick him into accepting the name fellow scholar. By giving Dr. Japers a name, the rabbit was free to steal not only his name but his very identity. While it is unclear how this transference is achieved by the creatures, it is due to the risk of this that the Foundation employs such strict rules for any research team tasked with traveling to the forest of SCP-4000. Make no mistake, names have more power than we realize, and this is evident in few places more so than SCP-4000, a pocket dimension where ever-changing survivors of a forgotten massacre exist as identities alone. Remember, a name is a powerful thing, whichever side of the well you find yourself on. Your name binds you to who you are, but if your name becomes someone else's, then one else of yours becomes theirs too.
1835. The American Frontier. A beacon of hope in a world choked with blood and smog. Little did the hopeful citizens of a still newly independent United States know. The evils of the old world had followed them here. Sometimes it took the form of hate, of violence, of desperation and starvation. But sometimes pure evil wasn't just some abstract concept existing in and around all of us. Sometimes that evil, that pure cruelty, malice, and greed, walks in the shape of a man. One such man was James Anderson, an unremarkable name for a truly exceptional man. Exceptional in the sense that if most human beings aren't willing to sell out all of humanity for their own petty gain, James Anderson is definitely the exception. After all, it's by his design that we have SCP-001, the anomaly that set the SCP Foundation and our entire reality down its current path. Of course, you know the deal with SCP-001. Not one anomaly, but many. A collective designation for a vast number of entries, all of which spell beginnings or ends for the SCP Foundation and sometimes even our universe. Scarlet Kings, Howling Black Moons, Ouroboros Cycles, and Gate Guardians. You've heard them all and seen the files. But unlike all the others, there is no file for the factory. That's because the full story only exists in the mind of 05-1. One of the most powerful and arguably the oldest member of the SCP Foundation. He'll die before he ever commits the story to paper. Some memories are just too awful to record. Their details and implications are too painful to ever subject others to. SCP-001 isn't just about Anderson and his atrocities. It's about all the terrible nightmares that unfolded afterward, and the deal with the devil that 05-1 struck to lock them away. For now, at least. But it all begins with James Anderson. His family had become incredibly wealthy in the Revolutionary War, and in the decades since, his fortune had only multiplied, as fortunes tend to do. In the early 1800s, he began work on his beautiful and horrific magnum opus, the Anderson Factory. It would be the pinnacle of the Industrial Revolution, the manufacturing plant to end all manufacturing plants. 3 stories tall and a mile wide. Company towns had existed for a long time, but this time, the factory itself was the town. It had everything a worker would ever need. They would live, sleep, play, and most importantly of all, work in the same place. They would never need to leave. All their wants and needs from cradle to grave would be met in the Anderson factory. And all that Mr. Anderson ever asked in return was loyalty and service. Was that really so much to ask from those whom he gave everything? It may sound like a horrifying form of indentured servitude to us, but to the people in the United States in the early 1830s, this kind of security and stability was a godsend. To many itinerant workers and unstable families across the plains, James Anderson seemed like a saint. Little did they know, his plans for the factory and them were anything but saintly. Nobody knows exactly what type of dark magic James Anderson devoted himself to. Many have theorized as to whether it was Satan he worshipped, ancient pagan deities, or something older and more powerful than both. In actuality, the only thing that James Anderson really worshipped was himself, and the pursuit of more material wealth and power over his fellow man. Any pacts he made with evil, timeless gods were just means to an end. The Anderson factory was a citadel to one man's cruelty and corruption, and every element of the building's design seemed to reflect that. Groups of 8 were forced into rooms together like battery-farmed chickens to maximize cost efficiency. People worked day and night in shifts of 3. Machines always rumbled and roared and chewed. When workers died in factory accidents and their blood spilled on the ground, it seemed to reveal arcane symbols carved into the stonework. These symbols were only visible when blood flowed across them. While people traveled hundreds of miles to live and work at the Anderson factory, they had no idea that they were working towards slavery, subjugation, and death under Anderson's iron will. And in some cases, fates much, much worse. The factory remained in operation like this for 40 years, while Anderson himself enjoyed a positive public reputation as a groundbreaking industrialist. How Anderson got away with his crimes for so long is sadly a tale as old as time. The factory made valuable products and an awful lot of profit. So, no matter how many rumors swirled about inhumane practices or arcane rites going on in the Anderson factory, nothing was ever done. It was just too inconvenient to ever reckon with the horrible truth underneath the productive surface. And it was truly productive. The factory was so huge and filled with such a multitude of enslaved workers, there wasn't anything they didn't produce. From textiles to technology to crops and meat, the machines were always on. The furnaces always burned. Anderson himself seemed obsessed with 2 things: efficiency and misanthropy, the contempt and hatred for humanity itself. He believed his workers were lower than him. They only existed as a means to his nightmarish ends. And if ever the workers became too injured to work, well, that doesn't mean that Anderson wouldn't still find ways to put them to good use. The lucky ones, starved and neglected or broken by the stress of work or the grinding gears of the machines, were used as material in the production of products. Some were drained of blood so that they could be used in the forging of metal. Others were ground up into meat slurry and used to pad out the beef, making it go further. People all across the country enjoying fine Anderson brand steaks had no idea that they were actually dining on human flesh the whole time. But as we said, the ones who ended up being cooked into steaks and hamburgers after death were the lucky ones, because at least they got to die. The truly unlucky injured workers became the subject of James Anderson's horrific occult experiments. Using a mix of twisted science and black magic, he turned men into abominations, powerful, terrifying monsters stronger and more deadly than any mortal man. Anderson was building himself an anomalous army, but it wasn't just monsters. There were just as many so-called normal humans helping him rule over the Anderson factory with an iron fist. They were vicious sadists themselves, spurred on by absolute loyalty to their immoral master. It was only after the Civil War that someone finally escaped the Anderson factory and confirmed that not only were the most horrific rumors about the place true, but they didn't even come close to covering the totality of what was going on there. When President Grant heard the reports, he was disgusted. As far as he was concerned, the atrocities of James Anderson should not be allowed to go on a minute longer. The directive was simple: find the factory, free its prisoners, and put James Anderson to death for his crimes. And thankfully, President Grant had the perfect group of operatives for the job. They were an elite unit of around 150 soldiers who performed a number of dangerous missions beyond enemy lines down south. Espionage, assassination, psychological warfare. But these missions weren't just against the Confederates. Some of the enemies they faced down south were things that could not be explained. The strange, the frightening, the anomalous. And the highest-ranking soldier in this unit was a man who would one day become the legendary 05-1. He and his men made their long and treacherous journey to the factory, a trip that would change all of their lives forever. When they first reached their destination, they first had to deal with Anderson's security force. These were men whose cruelty and loyalty to Anderson far outweighed their skill in combat. While they may have felt powerful when tormenting starving, injured factory workers, they were quickly routed and slaughtered by 05-1 and his team. When they ventured inside the factory, they were utterly appalled by what they saw. The inhuman conditions faced by Anderson's thousands of victims drove them into a blood-curdling, murderous rage. Almost half of 05-1's men were lost in the battle against Anderson's army of engineered monsters, but in the end, they prevailed. Nothing would stop them in their quest for liberation and vengeance on behalf of all that this terrible place had tormented. They fought their way to Anderson's office, where they found him cowering under his desk. For a man as despicable as Anderson, only a truly medieval execution would suffice. 05-1 and his men hanged, drew, and quartered Anderson over a period of 2 days. The sadistic madman died laughing in the end, saying that while they may kill him, his factory will never die. But the factory was no longer his. In addition to the factory's horrors, 05-1 and his men also discovered its wonders. It wasn't just normal items and monsters that the factory produced. They were also thanks to some of Anderson's arcane deals, the world's leading producer of anomalous items. Skeletal horses that never tire, shadow cloaks that could transport the wearer to different dimensions, toy guns that fire real bullets, even yo-yos that could flay the skin from anyone they touched. These were anomalous objects that could shift the balance of global power, items that could give them an advantage against the things that go bump in the night. While others among them were greedy or fearful, the inner circle of 05-1 were united in a singular purpose. Using the anomalous, they can control to contain the anomalous that they can't. This group took over the factory, making it Site Alpha, their first ever containment facility, and came to be known as the 05 Council. With funding that came from a mix of blackmail and friends in high places, this organization, a burgeoning SCP Foundation, grew more and more powerful over the ensuing decades. The tools they gained from the factory were pivotal in the continued success of their mission, and as they discovered more anomalies, they also put these anomalies to good use. But in 1911, 05-1 and his new organization came up against an enemy that even the factory's tools couldn't help them defeat. A warrior race known as the Fae, so named because their only weakness seemed to be a vulnerability to iron. But these beings were an order of magnitude more powerful than humans, or the beasts they'd once faced in Anderson's factory. The Fae handed them defeat after defeat, but soon humiliation became decimation when an army of the Fae led an assault on the factory. It was a day that only 05-1 remembered. The Fae slaughtered everyone, every guard, every researcher, every member of the 05 Council. They swept through the factory like a plague of locusts, leaving only death and destruction in their wake. Only 05-1 escaped and survived, and that's only because he ran. As he fled from the fairy forces through the halls of the factory, he came upon a door he'd never seen before, a huge golden door covered in Aramaic script. He fled inside, entering the very heart of the factory. Inside, he saw the floating dead body of James Anderson, bathed in red light. Now he was little more than the mouthpiece of the factory itself, or rather the great and unknowable powers working behind it. The factory gave O5-1 an offer, just like the offer it had given Anderson before. It would give them the power to turn back time and destroy the Fae, saving everyone that they'd slain in the factory. But in exchange, all of them would forever belong to the factory. And in a moment of weakness and fear, O5-1 took the deal. The clock was turned back to before the battle. This time O5-1 and his compatriots, all of whom except him had no idea what had happened, had the horrific weapons required to slaughter the Fae. Weapons that nobody, mortal or otherwise, could possess. They repelled the invading force easily, but knowing the horrors that came before, O5-1 refused to stop there. With the power of the Foundation and the factory behind him, he hunted down and murdered every last fairy, driving their species entirely into extinction. As far as O5-1 was concerned, it was them or him. But with the Fae utterly destroyed and the Foundation's superiority assured, a shadow was laying over O5-1. He'd made a deal with the factory, and someday it would want its pound of flesh. O5-1, rather than facing the consequences of his actions, decided to run and hide. He had the factory decommissioned and buried under the rubble, never to be used as an active Foundation base again. But just because they were done with the factory doesn't mean that the factory was done with them. One day a toy gun appeared on O5-1's desk, a toy gun that fired real bullets, just like the ones they found in the factory a century before. The factory was still waiting for its repayment. With every anomalous item from the factory that the Foundation used, the terrible place only grew in its power. Since the resurgence, O5-1 has been sending the factory sacrifices, D-classes, dead and alive, as well as agents and researchers. But as time goes on, it seems that these sacrifices aren't satisfying the factory anymore. It wants more than O5-1 can ever stand to give it. And when O5-1 refuses to give, the factory will begin to take. And what the factory wants, sooner or later, the factory will get. Your boss's office, his name etched on the frosted glass window in the door, sitting at the end of a long hallway. He called you in, and you don't know if you'll be leaving with your job. A grimy public bathroom filled with graffiti, spiders, cracked toilet seats, and a sinister shadow in the very last stall. A surgical theater where masked doctors wait with gleaming scalpels, forceps, and bone saws, preparing for an operation that you don't know if you'll wake up from. All of these have one thing in common: they're rooms that inspire dread. But after this video, you'll look back on all of them like you would your cozy childhood bedroom. A wise man once said, life has many doors. What he didn't say is that sometimes opening the wrong door can be a way of bringing that life to an untimely end, or worse. Especially when you're dealing with the kind of horrifying anomalies secured and contained by the SCP Foundation. You may think it's what's lurking inside the room that might be your biggest threat, but that's a potentially lethal assumption. Sometimes the most dangerous thing is the room itself. And that's what we're here to talk about today. 7 of the most terrifying rooms on the Foundation's database, none of which have ever been featured on this channel before. So reach out, grab the handle, and open the door. Welcome to the SCP Foundation's most terrifying rooms. All you can do is hope that, by the end, you'll actually be able to leave. We'll begin with an old classic from Series 1, SCP-002, a maleficent meatball known as the living room. There's a decent chance you're sitting in your living room right now while you watch this video, so you may be thinking, what's so wrong about that? But this really is a living room, and it's always on the lookout for some tasteful new furniture. From the outside, SCP-002 appears to be a huge, tumorous blob made out of living flesh. Sure, that may seem off-putting, but don't be so superficial. The inside of 002 is a different story. It may appear like your standard low-rent apartment from within, but this place has a lot of personality. There's a single window, despite there being no opening for a window from the outside. In addition to all the standard furniture, chairs, tables, a TV stand, it's actually developed a number of other wonderful amenities since being contained by the foundation, including 2 lamps, a throw rug, a television, a radio, a beanbag chair, 3 books in an unknown language, 4 children's toys, and a small potted plant. The first thing you might notice about the room is the funny smell. Then you might take a closer look at all that lovely furniture. That's when you'll realize that every single piece of furniture in there is made out of human tissue. Wood is polished and varnished bone. Fabrics are woven from human hair. Leather is made from tanned human skin. This is what happens to anyone who enters SCP-002. And sadly, if you've gotten close enough to see this, it's already too late. We hope you enjoy the rest of your existence as a brand new armchair. But maybe you don't want to get turned into furniture inside a living room within a giant tumor. Maybe you've got more specific needs. You like puzzles, exercises, and most of all, solitude. You like to test your mental and physical fortitude without worrying about the distractions caused by having to deal with other human beings. If that sounds like you, then let's get your feet wet and tell you about a wonderful piece of prime real estate you can find under the sea, SCP-057. This underwater chamber is almost impossible to get to without a James Cameron-style mini-submarine, but believe us, it's worth the effort. If you manage to access SCP-057 and enter its submerged chamber, then you're going to be treated to the best last challenge of your life. The door will close behind you, permanently, ensuring that wonderful privacy you so covet. Then the walls. These impenetrable monoliths of slate-covered stone will begin to move. Like a kind of high-stakes game show, you'll need to keep moving, avoiding the ever-shifting walls as the environment around you becomes more and more disorienting. There is no escape, only survival, and survival is only temporary. When your body fails you, or your mind snaps under the weight of sustained mortal terror, that's when those walls will close in. The monoliths of SCP-057 will get closer and closer and closer, until your body is crushed between them, killing you with a torturously slow squeeze where nothing and nobody will ever hear your final choked screams. But it's all worth it for that glorious ocean view. Oh, look at all those adorable little fishies. But hey, maybe sea punk isn't your favorite aesthetic. Maybe you're the more industrial type. You couldn't feel more at home than among a complex network of anomalous pipes. We'll admit that's eerily specific, but it isn't half as eerie as SCP-015. If you ever find yourself opening the door to the main room of a certain undisclosed warehouse, you'll feel like you've walked into an early 2000s screensaver with a decidedly gritty edge. An impossibly huge and intricate mass of pipes, vents, boilers, and other various plumbing apparatus that just keeps growing, seemingly becoming more strange and anomalous as it does so. These pipes have been made out of bone, wood, steel, pressed ash, human flesh, glass, and granite. There aren't any pipes made out of traditional pipe-making materials like lead, copper, ceramics, or PVC. And if you think what the pipes are made of is weird, the materials that travel through them are even freakier. These include oil, mercury, rats, a species of insect not yet identified, ground glass, seawater, entrails, and molten iron. And this is important to remember, because if you appear hostile to SCP-015 or enter the room carrying tools, the pipes will begin to burst and spray you with their contents in self-defense, resulting in one of the few times in human history where you'd be incredibly lucky to only be sprayed with rats or human entrails. Much like SCP-173, the sculpture, it's important to keep this room under strict observation. It's when the pipes are left unoccupied that they start expanding and trying to grow downwards in the hopes of mixing with the sewer system below. If ever that happens, then the pipes may end up coming to a room near you. And considering that people have also reported screaming coming from inside the pipes, what comes out of them may not even be as frightening as what could be going in. But maybe you don't want a warehouse. Perhaps you just want to rent a small, cozy room in a one-story building over in Weehawken, New Jersey. Problem is, if you try to do this, you might end up lodging in SCP-5256, a room that defies reality in a number of freaky ways thanks to its prior occupant, a highly unstable reality warper. The reality filters get stronger the further you go into the room, with the terminus being the room's far corner, which presents as an empty void that's impossible to even see. A damaged bloody hammer is lodged into the far wall. Metal fragments covered in human blood float near the entrance, half-eaten bugs all over the floor. There's a crucifix on the wall along with medical-grade anesthetics with trace amounts of neural tissue inside. All evidence points to the reality warper having been the victim of atrocious and inhumane acts, perhaps as a way to cure it of its anomalous affliction. And to add to the creep factor, many believe its body is still in there, lurking in the unseeable corner. How do we know? Because despite the corner of the room being unseeable, people have still performed simple tactile tests by sticking their hand into the space. One D-Class reported it feeling like leathery flesh with occasional scraps of fabric, and sharp needle-like objects occasionally sticking out of its skin. But for rent this cheap, who can really complain about a body or two? But that's enough about things that are just creepy. Let's get to dangerous instead. A room that won't just freak you out with some eerie anomalous sights. If you get unlucky, it'll give you a horrifying death. After all, who doesn't like a little excitement? Step into SCP-4595, a small room in a woodshed behind an abandoned house near Jasper, Indiana. You'll be taken in by its rustic charm at first. It's a quiet, peaceful setting where you're alone with your thoughts. When the room was first found, it contained a small, blood-stained shovel and a skeleton of an adolescent male. But don't let that put you off. Don't let the charcoal marking of the word witch written on the exterior door bother you either. It all just adds to the character of the room. Oh, there is one thing we should probably mention. There is an entity known as SCP-4595-A that lives a meter beneath the room. She's a witch-like creature, rotted and covered in wounds on her torso and face. Her mere presence will instill a sense of paranoia and dread into you, getting worse and worse the longer you're in there. But stay quiet about it. If at any point you disturb SCP-4595, all the empty spaces in your chest cavity as well as your lungs, airways, stomach, and intestine will suddenly fill with live desert locusts, causing you to experience a horrible death. So be a considerate upstairs neighbor, or else. So remember when we said earlier that it's not always what's inside the room that can cause you harm? Sometimes it's the thing right on the other side of the door. Look at the nearest closed door. Really focus on it. Tell us, how can you be so sure there's not something on the other side? Can you hear its heavy, wheezing breaths? It's not a home invader. It's something even worse. SCP-303. And it can make any room, anywhere, an absolute nightmare for you. Keep an eye on that door while we explain. SCP-303 is a tall, emaciated creature with dark skin and no face. Just a giant mouth twisted into a fixed grimace of pain with unnaturally long teeth. Nobody has ever seen its full body, but everyone afflicted with its anomalous effects somehow has an innate knowledge of exactly what they're dealing with. The amount of time that 303 spends behind the door seems to be random, but whenever it appears, people will be afflicted with such a level of raw, paralytic terror that they physically cannot bear to open the door while it's still there. This is one thing if it's hiding inside a broom closet, but if you're trapped in a room with only one exit, and 303 manifests behind it, you are in real trouble. As the number of people who have died of dehydration and starvation in totally normal rooms while boxed in by 303 have found out, when you're dealing with this monster, any room can be a nightmare. But while 303 is no doubt scary, it's not quite as mind-melting as SCP-970, the final anomalous room on this list. Much like 303, it involves doors, and rather than being fixed to a single location, it can appear in theoretically any room. Known as the recursive room, stepping through this door will lead to a copy of the room you were just inside. A little trippy, but not exactly pure nightmare fuel. But much like how a photocopier will slowly create distortions if the same image is copied repeatedly, The more rooms in the recursive room sequence that one cycles through, the more distorted each one gets. Eventually, the rooms will begin to display visuals straight out of your worst nightmares. Foundation researchers who sent a drone through a 6-hour sequence of recursive rooms ended up being discharged to undergo psychiatric treatment after seeing their own mutilated corpses in the rooms. A cruel trick, or a deadly phenomenon of things to come in a darker possible future? Either way, these unfortunate researchers couldn't get their experience in the recursive room out of their heads. But we're sure you'll have a more pleasant time. There you have it, folks. Some of the most terrifying rooms that the SCP Foundation is aware of. Let us know which one was your favorite down in the comments. And of course, be careful. If these are the ones the Foundation has in containment, imagine the ones that are still out there, waiting to be discovered. For all you know, it could only be one door away. If you're familiar with the SCP Foundation, then you already know the exact reason why there are multiple SCP-001s. You may even think you know which of them is the real SCP-001. But for those of you who are new here, or who just need a little reminder, the designation of SCP-001 doesn't refer to a single creature, object, or entity, but rather a collection of various anomalies that are apparently kept in containment by the SCP Foundation. At present, it is unclear why there are multiple files collected under the shared designation of SCP-001. Some believe it is because these anomalies are some of the earliest ever contained by the Foundation. This would mean that they share the designation of SCP-001, as they were likely encountered before the SCP Foundation introduced their current numbering system. However, there also exists a theory that this is nothing more than intentional misdirection. Perhaps the multiple SCP-001 files are an attempt by the Foundation to conceal information about the true SCP-001. After all, it wouldn't be the first time this hyper-secretive organization deceived us. Anomalies sharing the name SCP-001 include the infamous Scarlet King, the massive Gate Guardian, and the world-ending event known as When Day Breaks. But today we'll be using SCP-001 to refer not to an entity or an event, but to a location codenamed God's Blind Spot. Located in an unassuming corner of the world is a site that the SCP Foundation constructed and designated as Facility T. According to their archive, it's a largely unremarkable place, situated at a spot on the Sinai Peninsula, which is a part of Egypt that forms a bridge between the continents of Africa and Asia. In the 18th century, archaeologists excavating the area uncovered the remains of a stone structure believed to be an inn that dates back to the 2nd millennium BC. However, since the construction of Facility T, any trace of this structure has since disappeared. So, what makes this unremarkable site so important to the SCP Foundation? Why establish a facility if there was nothing anomalous about its nature? What distinguishes this SCP-001 site in the eyes of the Foundation is the area's profound lack of any ambient Akiva radiation. But what is Akiva radiation? Well, according to the Foundation's researchers, it's a form of cosmic background radiation, one that's not overtly harmful to human beings. If you grew up in a strict church-going household, then it's highly likely you would have been exposed to a lot of this non-electromagnetic radiation and never even realized it. You see, the thing with Akiva radiation is that it is directly correlated with the amount of religious faith a person has. Regardless of which religion someone follows, Akiva radiation will form around them. It tends to be harmless to humans. However, certain anomalous entities and SCPs considered to be demonic in nature can be repelled and even fought off with high levels of Akiva radiation. The presence of other powerful anomalies, those considered more benign or even holy, can also create an increase in this radiation. SCP-001 has earned the nickname God's Blind Spot for a number of reasons, one being that it is the only place on Earth with a natural absence of this Akiva radiation. The Foundation has conducted experiments that involve bringing sources known to emit Akiva radiation into the area of SCP-001, but when they measured, no change in radiation levels was detected. meaning that the space around Facility T does not actively block Akiva radiation from entering it, but also cannot absorb or retain this religious radiation. It might be more accurate to say that the location destroys any trace of residual Akiva without damaging the source. A lack of faith-field radiation is far from the only anomalous property of SCP-001 though. During a number of tests involving D-Class personnel, the Foundation witnessed that, while in the area, it also becomes impossible for the death of any human being to occur, a discovery that obviously needed to be researched further. The first test involved a healthy human male who was left in a containment cell on the SCP-001 site and observed. He had no supplies, no food, no water, yet over 120 days this man stayed alive, never succumbing to starvation or dehydration. Next, a female member of D-Class was exposed to a lethal dose of cyanide gas within Facility T and suffered none of the expected effects. Foundation researchers then repeated this cyanide gas test using 30 common brown rats, all of which were killed, proving that it was only humans that couldn't be killed while within SCP-001. God's blind spot seems to also be able to slow or halt the effects of terminal illnesses, as proven when a D-Class with stage 4 cancer was brought into SCP-001. Despite her prognosis stating that she would be dead imminently, the woman survived in the area for almost 800 days. Her cancer symptoms never advanced, and she only died after finally leaving the area of SCP-001. There are limitations to this anomalous effect though. One test involved cremating a healthy male D-Class while he was still alive. The man's body caught fire just as you would expect it to, and he was burned to death. According to the findings of that test and similar variations, Foundation researchers have learned that the life-preserving qualities of SCP-001 don't prevent death by extreme external damage. One of the final tests to take place within SCP-001 involved a pair of 24-year-old identical D-Class twins. One of the twins, designated Twin A, was held at Facility T, while the other, Twin B, was imprisoned in a cell at a different Foundation site. After observing them for over 26 years, Twin B aged naturally to the age of 50. His twin, however, did not appear to age at all over the course of 2.5 decades. It was only when moved to another facility that Twin A began to show signs of aging. The aging process for Twin A was rapid too, and eventually he caught up with his brother. Being a benign, non-threatening anomaly, the Foundation has been more than happy to use God's blind spot to their own advantage. Facility T was specifically established on this site to house the headquarters of the O5 Council, the overseers of the entire SCP Foundation. It's hardly surprising that the Overseer Council would want to set up shop here. After all, it's the one spot on planet Earth where no human being can ever die of natural causes, and will not age for the duration of their stay. Of course, this locked the O5 Council to one location. But what if they could replicate the effects of SCP-001 elsewhere? Of course, this is what the SCP Foundation attempted, following their research into God's blind spot. The Foundation's own Dr. Marvin Scranton attempted to artificially recreate the area's anomalous effects somewhere else. His hope was, by generating a vacuum of Akiva radiation, that a second instance of SCP-001 would occur at a location of his choosing. Or, as his assistant Bertrand put it, they planned to build a box and then push God out of it. As it turned out, God had other plans. Dr. Scranton quickly realized the hubris of his scheme. The Akiva radiation in the selected area rapidly dropped to 0, just as planned. But then something unexpected happened. Scranton detected an increase in Humes. These are essentially parts of the fabric of reality and are what's often disrupted by reality-bending SCPs. Something had come into our world thanks to the O5 Council's attempt to recreate SCP-001. Something impossible for the Foundation to measure or observe. In other words, Scranton had no idea what he unleashed or where it went. Following this incident, the O5 Council realized a worrying increase in the anomalous incidents they were encountering. Whether or not this came as a direct result of their meddling with the fabric of the universe was unclear, but it forced the council to reconsider the focus and direction of the entire SCP Foundation. Up until this point, they had been an organization focused purely on research, but now they had to embrace a new approach to how they handled anomalies. From then on, the Foundation's objective became to actively seek out and contain anomalous entities, creatures, objects, and locations like SCP-001. Rather than just observing these phenomena for study, they would secure, contain, and protect. The final portion of SCP-001's file is a memorandum detailing an arrangement between the O5 Council and an unknown counterparty. In the document, someone named Sheldon Katz set out revised terms for the Foundation's continued use of Facility T. Sheldon states that he has reached an understanding with the counterparty, and that the contents of the document are to serve as a formal agreement, a contract of sorts between the SCP Foundation and someone else. According to this contract, the incident with Scranton put a strain on the relationship between the Foundation and whoever the counterparty is, and that the O5 Council are seeking to make amends in order to continue their new goal of collecting and containing anomalies. So who was this counterparty that the Overseer Council was so desperate to appease and have on their side? Who could possibly be a higher power than the most powerful secret organization on Earth? Well, an actual higher power, of course. That's right. The O5 Council was making a deal with God over how they were allowed to use his blind spot, or at least a very powerful being that considers itself to be God. The rules laid out on their agreement stated that no person was permitted to stay at the site of SCP-001 for more than 120 years, including members of the O5 Council, along with other members of Foundation staff, management, researchers, security personnel, and test subjects. Additionally, the SCP Foundation's Ethics Committee was required to annually report any and all of the O5 Council's decisions to God. For his own part, God was restricted from smiting or exacting his terrible wrath upon any member of Foundation personnel. That's right. A perk of working for the SCP Foundation is getting around-the-clock divine protection, at least from God himself. That's still a lot better than an employee dental plan. This came with a condition, however, that anyone committing a transgression or mortal sin was given a 90-day written notice and an opportunity to repent their wrongdoing. In return, God demanded that members of the Foundation only worshipped him and no other divine entities. I, the Lord, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, was written in the contract. Finally, the agreement between the O5 Council and God was that they would work together. The Foundation and the counterparty would be equal partners when it came to the containment of SCPs and anomalies. Of all the strange and unexplained phenomena that the SCP Foundation encounters on a regular basis, it hardly comes as much of a surprise that they've got a direct line to the big guy upstairs, or at least one who purports to be. Still, the fact that the O5 Council have a business arrangement with an ultra-powerful deity-like being and express written permission to use his blind spot where no person can die or age is hardly a comforting thought. At least the SCP Foundation only ever uses its power for good, right? The first thing that tips the Foundation off to SCP-087's presence were the reports of numerous unexplained disappearances on campus. There were plenty of rumors about what might be behind them, but field agents suspected that the true source of the vanishing would be something beyond civilian imagination. All anyone knew for sure was that everyone who had gone missing was last seen in a certain administrative building on the university grounds, and that the disappearances only seemed to happen when the elevator was out. The campus was soon flooded with Foundation agents, creating a barrier around the administrative building and the presumed habitat of SCP-087. Nobody else could get in, and hopefully whatever was inside couldn't get out. One of the Foundation's lead scientists was flown in to consult on the investigation. What could have been behind those students disappearing? The doctor's preliminary interviews with university staff who worked in the building yielded some interesting details. Strange noises, like banging and even a faint, shrill crying, would be heard from a door that led to a no longer used stairway in hallway 3B. Staff in the building had no reason to ever take these stairs, especially considering how many of them reported a strange sense of unease when just standing outside the dorm. The only reason someone might take those stairs is due to elevator malfunctions. In that instant, the doctor had put it all together. The staff they interviewed had their memory wiped with amnestics, special chemicals used by the Foundation with the power to delete human memories. The Foundation only used them for staff or civilians who had confirmed contact with an SCP, and the doctor knew that they had a live one on their hands. The staircase. There was something terribly wrong with that staircase, and it was the SCP Foundation's job to find out what, before it made anybody else disappear. This is the story of SCP-087, otherwise known as the Endless Staircase, and the 3 doomed journeys down into its murky depths. The doctor was more than eager to begin research into the staircase and its frightening, anomalous properties. After all, you don't claw your way up to being one of the Foundation's key researchers without being brave, and perhaps just a little bit deranged. As was standard, once a perimeter was secured around the staircase, the good doctor requested a selection of D-Class personnel for testing. For those not in the know, D-Class is the Foundation's polite way of saying cannon fodder. The doctor was sent 3 D-Class prisoners for use in his investigation of SCP-087. The first, D-8432, was, according to official documentation on the incident, a 43-year-old male of average build and appearance and unremarkable psychological background. This man once worked for the Foundation in a more official capacity, but he was given the often deadly demotion to D-Class due to a dangerous mistake handling SCP-682 that led to the deaths of several other agents. Now, it looked like it would be his turn. The doctor explained his mission to him: explore the staircase, gather data, help us find out exactly what we're dealing with here. If you come back alive, there may even be a promotion in it for you. And with that promise, D-8432 was given his loadout, a 75-watt flood lamp with battery power capable of lasting 24 hours, an audio headset, and a handheld camcorder fitted with a transmission stream, and an audio headset that would allow him to communicate with Dr. Bright. D-8432 was then pushed through the door in hallway 3B and out onto the staircase. According to Declassified Foundation files describing the staircase, SCP-087 is an unlit platform staircase. Stairs descend on a 38-degree angle for 13 steps before reaching a semicircular platform of approximately 3 meters in diameter. Descent direction rotates 180 degrees at each platform. The design of SCP-087 limits subjects to a visual range of approximately 1.5 flights. But in D-8432's mind, unlit really didn't seem like the right word. He would have chosen all-consuming darkness. Despite carrying a powerful 75-watt lamp, D-8432 was only capable of partially lighting the platform he was standing on, and the illumination only stretched down 9 of the 13 steps to the next platform. When D-8432 observed how little help his lamp was giving him, he was instructed to shine it out of the doorway into hallway 3B. When he did so, the light seemed to shine far further than it ever could in SCP-087. Already, the beginning of the anomalous activity was obvious. Everywhere else, darkness is just the absence of light. In SCP-087, darkness eats light. It was like a tangible black mass that only a certain amount of light could survive, while the rest just wouldn't show. D-8432 swallowed hard over a lump in his throat. The door to hallway 3B was closed behind him, and he was ordered to descend. Surviving to see that promotion was feeling unlikely, but it's not like he had a choice. If he tried to escape SCP-087 before he was permitted, he'd be shot by SCP Foundation field agents on the spot. So he followed the high-ranking doctor's orders and began to descend the steps to the next platform. Nothing about the physical makeup of the staircase itself seemed abnormal. The base and walls were a very plain, dull concrete with a metal handrail. The only thing that seemed unique about it so far was the strange light-bending properties. That was, until he reached the second platform down and he heard it, a soft, echoing cry. A child's cry. It was shrieks of panic, or maybe even pain, echoing up from below. He was asked why he had stopped, and he explained the crying sound he'd been hearing. It sounded like it was coming from far down the stairs, maybe 200 meters below him. He could just make out the words "please," "help," and "down here" coming from the darkness. But the team outside the stairwell couldn't hear anything, so they asked him to descend further. Another platform down, and they could hear it too, the unmistakable cries of a terrified child. "Please, help," and "down here." D8432 was ordered to keep going, and only stop if he noticed changes to the visual environment or in the sounds he was hearing. D8432, knowing his life was on the line, had to keep going and descended another 20 flights of stairs before stopping to remark that the sounds of the child hadn't gotten any closer. They still sounded just as far away as when he'd first heard them. He was told his observations were noted and pressured to continue. Within half an hour, D8432 had descended a full 50 floors with no sign of a bottom in sight. Somehow, the volume of the child's crying had remained consistent throughout, as if it was moving away from D8432 at the same rate he was descending. At this point, D8432 reported that he was feeling uneasy. The doctor said that this was understandable, given the circumstances. He'd been watching what little there was to see over a live video feed the entire time, and something about the truly bottomless nature of the staircase and the ever-elusive crying was undeniably eerie. But things were about to really take a turn for the worst. As D8432 stepped forward towards the next set of stairs, he froze. There was something on the platform below him, barely illuminated by the light of his 75-watt bulb. It was a face, vaguely human in size and shape, but with a few terrifying differences. It had grayish skin and no mouth, nostrils, or pupils. And yet, D8432 could feel that this thing was making eye contact with him. He couldn't move, trapped in the thing's piercing gaze. In an instant, the face jerked forwards, suddenly only about a foot away from D432's face, eyes staring into its own. D8432 screamed and ran, scaling all 50 flights in an astonishing 18 minutes before charging out into hallway 3B. There, he collapsed from the exhaustion and the fear of what he'd just seen. Upon reviewing the footage, the strange face was designated SCP-087-1. Fascinating. It was time for a second experiment. The doctor just had to know more. The second test subject was D9035, a 28-year-old male with a history of aggravated assaults against women. He was given the same loadout as his predecessors, except this time with an even more powerful 100-watt bulb. He was also given 100 small LED lights that had adhesive backs and a battery life of approximately 3 weeks, with which they intended to permanently illuminate SCP-087. However, despite the extra wattage of his bulb, he still couldn't illuminate beyond the 9th step. SCP-087 wouldn't allow it. Having no ideas of the horrors that lurked below him, he descended on the doctor's orders and began fixing the LEDs to the walls of each platform he passed. The LED always illuminated the landing, but the light couldn't pass the first step on either side. The flights of stairs themselves would remain in perpetual darkness. After the second flight, D9035 noticed the same crying D8432 had heard and became uneasy. Just like before, as D9035 descended, the volume of the crying didn't seem to increase, as if for every step he descended, the source of the crying descended 1 too, keeping them at a constant 200 meters apart. Still, he was ordered to continue his descent and the placing of LEDs even as his paranoia grew. When he reached the 51st floor, he observed damage to the wall and steps. Sections appeared to have been smashed to rubble by an extreme force. As he descended past the broken step, he only felt his fear, anxiety, and paranoia grow. The doctor made note of the fact that SCP-087 seemed to cause instances of anxiety and terror in its occupants, even before they encountered SCP-087-1. As D9035 reached Platform 89, a full 350 meters under the initial platform, he stopped dead in his tracks and saw something staring up at him from the platform below. That same terrible gray face with those dead white eyes. He was encouraged to stay calm and try to get better footage of the face, but it charged for him, and D9035 ran for his life. He ascended the staircase at a staggering pace, even passing out from exhaustion and remaining motionless for 14 minutes halfway. When D9035 finally gathered the strength to get up, he scrambled back to hallway 3B and fell into a state of catatonia. He remains unresponsive to all external stimuli to this day. just staring off into the distance with a haunted expression, almost like he's still there in the hallway. The doctor wanted to conduct one more test before he ordered SCP-087 shut off from the world forever, and it was the most terrifying of all. The final subject was D9884, a 23-year-old woman with a history of depression and use of excessive force. The doctor had hoped that D9884 would travel the deepest yet, and so he gave her the additional supplies of a backpack containing 3.75 liters of water, 15 nutrient bars, and 1 thermal blanket. As far as the Foundation was concerned, she was in this for the long haul, but none of them had any idea quite how right they were. When D9884 entered SCP-087, all the lights from the previous expedition had disappeared. Still, she was ordered to go deeper. She heard the crying of the mysterious child, if it was even a child at all, and again she was ordered to go deeper. At the 496th landing, even as D9884 seemed to slip into a state of mortal terror, once again she was ordered to go even deeper. Every moment, he was hoping to get a better look at the face of SCP-087-1, and when D9884 finally broke and fled back upstairs, he did. The face appeared, but this time, it was mere inches behind her, staring directly into the camera with its blank eyes, startling even this veteran of the supernatural. The face appearing caused D9884 to panic and flee, but instead of going back up the stairs to safety, she went deeper down the staircase in an attempt to escape it, deeper and deeper and deeper, until her video feed cut out. D9884 was never seen again. In the aftermath of the tests, the SCP was classified as Euclid. It may have been dangerous, but at least it was easy to contain. The door to hallway 3B was replaced with one made out of reinforced steel with an electro-release lock mechanism. It has been disguised to resemble a janitorial closet consistent with the rest of the building. The lock won't release unless a classified number of electrical volts are applied, while the key is turned counterclockwise. And after a few inches of foam insulation were applied to the inner side of the door, staff at the building never again reported hearing strange noises. As for the fates of those lost within the endless turning flights and platforms of SCP-087, we may never know, but one can only assume it isn't pleasant.
On March 15, 2011, Martin Sims was wandering down the streets of Carson, California. His clothes were ragged, he was filthy, and gibbering like a madman with a full beard and long, unkempt hair. His body was covered in scars, but he showed no signs of malnutrition. What made Martin's sudden appearance so remarkable? He'd been missing for 3 years. When he was interviewed by police, they asked him where he'd been all this time. They couldn't believe his answer. He'd been trapped in an IKEA since 2008, but this was no ordinary IKEA. This was a dangerous anomaly that would come to be known as SCP-3008. Martin's strange answers in his interview were laughed off by his interviewing officers, who assumed he was either crazy or under the influence of something, but they caught the attention of an SCP Foundation field agent embedded in the precinct. The report was passed up the chain to a local site director who approved a detachment of Foundation field operatives to look into Martin's case. While he was reluctant to lead the Foundation agents back to the offending IKEA, the Foundation can be extremely persuasive. His screams of, "Please, I'm begging you, don't take me back, don't make me go back," were noted but ultimately disregarded. When the SCP Foundation had triangulated the position of SCP-3008, which was indeed an active IKEA, the entire retail zone was closed and barricaded under the pretense of a severe black mold infestation. Armed Foundation personnel also arrived on the site shortly after, based on Martin's vague statements that there were creatures of some kind inside. Due to his deteriorating mental health, Martin was unable to provide a great deal of lucid information on the specific traits of SCP-3008. But one phrase he kept repeating was "bigger on the inside." Once researchers were satisfied that Martin had delivered all the pertinent information he was able to, he was administered Foundation amnestics to erase his memory of the last 3 years and return to his family. A cover story was formulated. Martin had been kidnapped and abused for 3 years by a mentally unbalanced stalker in downtown Carson. He'd been able to escape as said stalker took his own life out of guilt, a suicide that the Foundation expertly fabricated to make their cover story airtight. With the loose end of Martin Sims taken care of, the true observation of SCP-3008 could begin. A base set around the perimeter of the mysterious IKEA kept a 24-hour watch on the building, covering all potential entrances and exits. No exploratory missions had yet been approved by the Foundation Ethics Committee, so they first wanted to perform a week of external observation to see if any of the store's anomalous properties extended beyond the confines of the building. After a week of nothing, it appeared they did not. A local site director approved of the use of 20 disposable Class D personnel to explore the interior of SCP-3008. The D-Class operatives would be split into 4 squads of 5 men, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and Delta Squad. Each would be assigned a different quadrant of the store and would deliver information back to the control team on site via a live audio and video link. 3 of the 4 teams upon entering the store reported nothing out of the ordinary. Neither the audio or video they were sending back indicated anything different from a standard IKEA store, from the flat-pack wardrobes to the Swedish meatballs. Team Delta, however, suddenly began experiencing a scrambled audio and video connection. Shortly after, communication with Team Delta dropped off entirely. They disappeared somewhere inside the store and haven't been seen since, with one notable exception. After the disappearance and the extraction of teams, Foundation researchers classified SCP-3008 as Euclid because its anomalous properties were at least confined to the interior of the store, and even then seemingly not the entire interior. The anomalous area within SCP-3008 became known as SCP-3008-1, and containment appeared to be 100% secure. There was no telling how many people had already gone missing in the store over the years, but the disappearances must be stopped. The Foundation maintained constant surveillance around the perimeter of SCP-3008, but it appeared they could prevent any further incidents by simply preventing other civilians from accessing the IKEA store. Martin's ravings about monsters were assumed to just be the product of delirium, until a surviving member of Delta Team suddenly reappeared. The date was November 3, 2011. It was a cold night, a few hours after what would have been closing time if the store were still active, and 7 months after the extraction teams had disappeared somewhere in the confines of SCP-3008. There had been no anomalous activity outside the store since the perimeter was first secured, and the Foundation researchers hadn't expected that to change until the last surviving member of Delta Team came barging out of the store's entrance. Startled field operatives were amazed to see him again, but they were even more amazed to see what was following him out of the store, repeating the same phrase: "The store is now closed, please exit the building." Despite the fact that the entity chasing the Delta Team survivor was wearing the yellow shirt and blue pants of an IKEA store employee, the being definitely was not human. It was around 7 feet tall with no visible face. The entity had grossly extended limbs, with each arm being around 5 or 6 feet long and ending in a huge oversized hand. The whole process was so sudden that the field agents present at the perimeter weren't able to save the Delta Team survivor, as the entity reached forward with his freakishly long arms, grabbed him, and twisted his head off like a child with a doll. The field operatives present drew their weapons and peppered the entity with bullets. It would later be classified as SCP-3008-2. The being appeared to collapse and die from the physical trauma, at which point it and the body of the former Delta Team survivor were taken for an autopsy by Foundation researchers. There were no biological abnormalities of the body of the Delta Team survivor, so it did not appear that the anomalous properties of SCP-3008-1 had any effect on the physiology of its occupants. He was not malnourished despite being missing for months, and the contents of his stomach looked to be half-digested food consistent with the menu of a typical IKEA store restaurant. SCP-3008-2, on the other hand, raised a number of perplexing biological questions. The autopsy revealed that the creature's clothes were actually part of its body, like an additional layer of skin. The creature lacked blood or any kind of vascular system. Even stranger, the entity didn't appear to have bones or internal organs, not even a brain or nervous system. It was a being made entirely of skin all the way to its core. How it was able to move, or even live for that matter, remains a mystery. Though when you work for the SCP Foundation, you learn to accept that some things will always remain unexplained. One thing was certain though, Martin Sims was right about his monsters. After the incident with Delta Team, the Foundation deemed that sending manned explorations into the heart of SCP-3008 was too much of a liability, and planned a series of drone-based reconnaissance missions into the anomaly. The first of these drones experienced connection issues and failed when attempting to venture into the IKEA's anomalous zone. However, after a lengthy period of trial and error, the Foundation was able to establish a more secure connection with its drones, even when deep into the SCP-3008-1 anomalous zone. It was only then that some of the most extraordinary discoveries were made. made. SCP-3008-1 seemed to break the laws of spatial reality, as the area of the IKEA's interior was at least an order of magnitude larger than its exterior. Just as Martin Sims had said, it was bigger on the inside, but just how much bigger? The Foundation has yet to find evidence of any physical terminators within the store that might indicate SCP-3008-1 has an endpoint, while an area of at least 10 kilometers squared has been uncovered in SCP-3008-1. It could, in theory, be infinite. Laser rangefinder tests, which are normally very reliable, have only given inconclusive results. Interestingly, the anomalous area doesn't have any clear visual differences from the rest of the IKEA store, except that it extends forever. An individual trapped within the confines of SCP-3008-1 wouldn't even realize they've entered an anomalous zone until they tried to locate an exit and leave, at which point they'd find they were already hopelessly lost. The geography of SCP-3008-1 does at least appear to be consistent, so people trapped within are theoretically able to retrace their steps and escape if they haven't already ventured too deep. According to data collected during the drone reconnaissance missions, SCP-3008-2, of which there appear to be a vast population, would wander the stores aimlessly during the day. They are unresponsive to the drone's presence and did not appear to be aggressive. While the physical descriptions of these creatures could vary slightly, they all follow the same overall trend. Clothes consistent with an IKEA uniform, no face, either seemingly too tall or too short, and limbs that are grossly out of proportion with their bodies. As the Foundation began sending drones deeper into SCP-3008-1, they found another incredible discovery. There was an unknown population of humans trapped inside IKEA's anomalous zone, and these people had used the IKEA furniture around them to create entire settlements and towns within the store. There were several of these towns, all of which seemed to cohabitate peacefully. Even Foundation personnel found this development in their research to be truly extraordinary. Since SCP-3008 was first identified, there have been only 14 civilian escapes. Some had been trapped inside for months, others had been in there for years, some far longer than Martin's 3-year stint. While every one of these escapees has eventually been released back to their home, after a liberal application of amnestics and a proper cover story has been devised, the Foundation interviewed each of them extensively first. According to each of these escapees, the people trapped inside the IKEA have built an entirely new society across the various settlements. Contrary to the Lord of the Flies expectations of a group of people isolated and afraid, there's immense cooperation between the trapped civilians. The food in the several IKEA restaurants in SCP-3008-1 mysteriously replenishes while nobody's there, so there's no threat of starving, and the automatic turning on and off of the lights forms as a rudimentary kind of day and night cycle. Nighttime, however, is when things get dangerous, as the SCP-3008-2 entities, which are known to the people inside as the staff, become extremely hostile after dark. Aggressive hordes of the staff swarm the settlements at night, repeating, "This door is now closed, please exit the building." The civilians inside are usually able to repel these attacks with minimal casualties, but the constant war of attrition slowly wears down those inside. The bodies of the creatures also need to be removed from the area after each attack, as the presence of corpses or even parts of corpses has been known to heighten the ferocity of the next night's attack. During the day, the staff return to a docile and unresponsive state, though they'll still defend themselves violently if anyone dares to attack. Over the course of the interviews with the 14 escapees, Foundation researchers were able to answer another of their key questions. How had so many people gone missing in the store for so long without being noticed? But the answer they received only raised many more unsettling queries. According to the escapees, there were people inside the settlements that, despite being otherwise of entirely sound mind and standard intelligence, seemed to lack very common knowledge that even a child should know. For example, some of them weren't aware of the International Space Station orbiting the Earth, or stranger still, the existence of the Statue of Liberty. This led the researchers to a frightening conclusion. SCP-3008-1 may not only be a nexus point of multiple IKEA stores in our dimension, it could be connected to IKEAs in every dimension where IKEAs exist. While it only abducts a handful of people from each store over an extended period of time, it suddenly becomes clear how this SCP was able to trap so many people without detection over such a long period of time, which in turn led to an even more terrifying revelation. The SCP Foundation may not have SCP-3008-1 as contained as they thought. It might even be tucked away in an IKEA store somewhere near you, just waiting for you to visit. After all, there's always room for one more.
Agent Kister was running for his life. Every breath had burned in his throat, like inhaling chlorine gas. He sped through the dark, surrounded by deafening metallic screams that bounced off the eternity of pipes scaling and strangling the walls around him. As far as he was concerned, This was what hell looked like. A nightmare boiler room that would somehow be less scary if Freddy Krueger was there, because at least there'd be some kind of recognizably human intelligence to reason with. The pipes, SCP-015, are truly unknowable. As an SCP Foundation Mobile Task Force member, Agent Kister had seen some truly horrific things in the line of duty. He'd been there during SCP-682 containment breaches, firing an assault rifle at the beast as its scales hardened into a bulletproof carapace. He'd seen the femur breaker used on some poor, godforsaken D-Class to lure Uncle Larry back into the containment chamber for some midnight fun. In the most anxiety-inducing mission of his life, he'd once even bagged 096's weeping face after it slaughtered a whole mountain village. And these damn pipes were going to be the thing that killed him. He turned a sharp corner, trying to block out the screams of his teammates. 4 of them had been sent in. The rest were already dead, or worse. Stupid, stupid, stupid. They'd made a classic military mistake, underestimating the capabilities of their enemy. And in Agent Kister's experience, this had always been a capital offense. All to install that machine. That stupid little remote control reconnaissance vehicle. That's what they'd given their lives for. Agent Kister tried to blink away the memory of Agent Montgomery's face. Monty was the youngest member of the team, 28 years old, his first major mission into the heart of a skip. Kister wanted to remember him how he'd first seen him, a bright-eyed greenhorn, ready to protect the human race from the horrors that lay in the dark. But he'd been the first to go when everything got FUBAR. It was the smaller pipes that got Monty. 4 of them shot out, spearing his lungs and heart, pinning him in place. Even if they tried to cut him out, he would have been a goner. He coughed up blood and went ghost white faster than you'd ever imagine. Kister would never forget, for what little time he had left to live, the horrible sight of the light leaving that kid's eyes. And all this because one of them had tripped on one of the pipes on the way out and busted it. The mission was already done. What an awful, pointless way to die. Kister was yanked from his aching thoughts by a sudden obstacle in the way. A huge, towering pipe that looked like a pillar of flesh, covered in bulbous, staring eyes. The thought crossed his mind. Jesus, these pipes can really be made out of anything. He looked down and saw a series of rubber pipes slithering towards his feet along the ground like snakes. It was time to run again, but how long could you even run for when the very location around you wants you dead? They should have sent the mole rats for a job like this. The infinitely reconfiguring pipes changed the layout of the warehouse around him, making escape seem all the more unfeasible. That's when he started thinking about the terrible thing that happened to Agent Green. When 015 turned hostile, they needed to make a run for it fast. It wasn't unlike being a pathogen inside a living body. You start to make trouble, and the body's immune system is going to come for you. And one of the most common mechanisms for a body fighting a virus is a fever, a sudden increase in temperature that burns out the threat. The group turned and ran as the pipes started twisting towards them. Agent Green panicked and began striking at the pipes around him with his hands. The first instinct would have been to shoot, but no guns were permitted inside the SCP-015 warehouse. It reacted severely to any kind of tool being brought into its proximity. Several dead agents and researchers could tell you all about this if they hadn't made that same mistake. But when things were already going sideways, it left them defenseless. Agent Green was soon boxed in, caged by a latticework of pipes in varying sizes. He tried desperately to push them out of the way and make an escape route, but the hissing noise was getting louder and louder as the pipes started to turn a glowing red all around him. After all, when a body needs to deal with a hostile foreign object, it burns out the threat. Kister wished he could shake the awful high-pitched wail that Agent Green made while the heat inside his pipe cage became unbearable. It was like seeing a human get caught inside a giant bug zapper. His skin went black and charred, and soon after, the heat had risen to such an insane degree that Agent Green was reduced to little more than ash in his pipe furnace. But Kister couldn't afford to dwell. He kept running, vaulting over a long, ragged pipe made from stinking human hair. This terrible place stank of motor oil, mold, and death. But maybe those perceptions had been colored by the terrible things he'd seen here. There it was again, that awful choked screaming coming from inside the pipes. Agent Boggs. It was a nightmare to hear him shriek like that. Boggs had been one of the toughest men that Kister had ever met. He mentored him back when he first became an MTF member. Having Boggs on the team meant experience. It meant safety. It meant that things would go okay. Kister had seen Boggs stare down some of the most horrifying skips imaginable and not even flinch. And yet, here he was, screaming and bawling like a hurt child in the pipes. Boggs was the next one to get taken. As he and Kister ran through the dark, trying to find a way out, they'd passed a huge pipe made of a soft foam-like substance. A seam in the side of the pipe had yawned open, and a tangle of writhing tentacles, each one barbed with thorns like the stem of a rosebush. They enveloped Agent Boggs, cutting into his weathered skin. He gasped in pain, unable to scream. It happened so fast. Before Kister even had a chance to grab him, he was pulled into the pipe, and the crevice sealed behind him. And that was when the screaming really started for poor Agent Boggs. Kister hoped for his sake that he would die sometime soon. Shrouded in the fog of his dark thoughts, Agent Kister turned a corner and felt cold, hard metal suddenly collide with his face, breaking his nose with an unpleasant crunch. He'd been clotheslined by a low pipe that hadn't been there before, and now he was laid out on his back, face humming with pain. Thoughts and feelings swam. He looked up into the seemingly infinite web of pipes weaving through the air above him. He was right earlier. He just knew it. The place was hell. It'd be his eternal resting place. Suddenly, a new, huge shape moved into the space above him. A pipe of ancient, rusty iron that looked older than even the warehouse holding this whole mess. Right above him, there was a huge valve fixed into the pipe's belly. He watched helpless as the valve opened itself with a squeal, and a huge dark mass came pouring out of it onto his body. A sudden weight, a sudden warmth, sound and movement, and tiny scratching claws. Rats. Thousands of big, hungry black rats with gnarled yellow teeth. Clumps of fur purged from their skin by mange. Big, ropey, worm-like tails swaying and whipping at the air. Who knows how long they'd been in that pipe? Who knows when these rats had eaten anything that wasn't their brothers and sisters? And here was Agent Kister, given unto them by the glorious pipes. The last thing he ever saw were those nasty yellow teeth, because they ate his eyes first. Word of the four disappeared, and presumed dead operatives soon reached Dr. Charles Ogden Gears, the legendarily taciturn senior researcher that managed the SCP-015 project, among a myriad of others. His face didn't betray a flicker of emotion when he was informed about the men lost to SCP-015. It wasn't that he didn't feel for them, more that he deemed it both unproductive and unprofessional to dwell on the deaths of personnel when carrying out their duties. After all, being killed by an anomaly was simply an occupational hazard, and a generous stipend would be sent to their families to compensate for their tragic loss. Dr. Gears simply asked, "Was the mission successful in spite of the casualties? Did the team manage to install the modular robotic vehicle at the epicenter?" He was told that the MRV had been successfully installed at least. Dr. Gears nodded and began scheduling a second exploratory mission for a few months in the future to check the status of the machine. Still, in the meantime, the MRV would chug along, doing what humans couldn't, or perhaps shouldn't, do within the nightmarish mess of ever-growing pipes. It would roll through, collecting information on everything around it, hopefully giving the SCP Foundation an inroad to mapping the whole thing, without needing to send a cavalcade of staff into the danger zone, just to discover more about these peculiar pipes. Sure, some lives were lost getting in there, but this measure would likely save even more lives in the long run. That was, until something went wrong. The exact nature of what happened to the MRV inside the domain of pipes was a mystery, but it wasn't doing its intended job, and the SCP Foundation needed to find out why. The second exploratory mission was required much sooner than they'd initially anticipated, with a dual purpose: collecting the readings and finding out what exactly had happened to the MRV in the first place. He included a more specific set of instructions for the next mission. Only 3 members of personnel to enter SCP-015 this time, to minimize potential loss. one trained technician to collect and read the diagnostics, and 2 guards to maintain discipline and safety under pressure. With a setup like that, what could possibly go wrong? Dr. Gears's various assistants began headhunting the perfect team for the job. Junior researcher Lon, wanting to prove herself and climb up the ranks, put her name forward. She was young, intelligent, and had the initiative to get the job done. Though there was one thing that she hadn't disclosed when she was applying for this important new position. Junior researcher Lon suffered from claustrophobia, the fear of enclosed spaces. Then the hunt was on for the 2 members of Foundation military personnel who'd escort Lon to the MRV to take the readings. Like the 2 priests in The Exorcist, they decided to recruit one grizzled, experienced operative and one extremely cautious young buck straight out of the Foundation MTF Training Academy. The younger of the 2 operatives, codenamed Agent 2, was careful and conscientious to a fault. He did things by the book, or not at all. The older operative, codenamed Agent 6, was quite the opposite. He'd done this job long enough to operate solely on instinct, and resented his employers for expecting him to approach his missions any other way. Lon, Agent 2, and Agent 6. The team was assembled, and when the time came, they were taken to SCP-015 to execute their mission. It should have been simple enough. Get in, collect the readings, and get back out. Though a few weeks earlier, the same thing would have been said for the mission to install the MRV, which left for Mobile Task Force operatives dead or worse. Nothing was ever as simple as it seemed when it came to SCP-015. They were only allowed flashlights inside. Anything else carried a substantial risk of activating SCP-015's defensive state, putting all of their lives in jeopardy. Lon had tried to keep things light, masking her own terrible fear at this strange new situation. She joked that perhaps the 3 of them should get Mario hats, seeing as they were plumbers now. Agent 2 happily laughed along, suggesting that perhaps he should be Luigi. Agent 6 was utterly unamused by this whole situation and wanted no part of it, which is honestly just so Wario of him. They followed along a carefully mapped route through the pipes, being careful not to touch any of them. After all, you never know what could set SCP-015 off. Agent 6 didn't share in their merriment or their concern. In fact, he had contempt for them and this whole situation. He thought Lon and Agent 2 were a pair of frightened, skittish children, willing to buy whatever Foundation-assigned bull honky they were given. He didn't believe that SCP-015 was anywhere near as dangerous as they'd been told. In all likelihood, knowing the eggheads up top, they just didn't want men of action like him breaking any of their precious little toys while conducting missions on their behalf. This whole thing was a big, stupid joke. As they ducked and weaved through the confines of SCP-015, the tensions between them all just silently grew. Their flashlights played among the pipes, revealing the insane variety of shapes, sizes, compositions, and materials in here. Wood, steel, flesh, bone, glass, pressed ash, granite, and so much more. And yet there were no pipes comprised of any standard pipe-making material, like lead, PVC plastic, or copper. It was undeniably freaky, but when you work with SCPs for long enough, you learn to stop asking questions about the more minor forms of strangeness inherent to anomalies. The composition only got narrower as they delved deeper into the warehouse. Lon felt the anxiety, like a hand gripping her throat and squeezing, but tried still to keep it hidden. Agent 6, the largest among them, almost got stuck a few times, trying to crawl into spaces too tight for him to fit. He felt like murdering Lon when she threw out a casual comparison to Winnie the Pooh in the process. When they reached the MRV, it gave them an ounce of momentary relief. The journey was halfway done. But the comfort was quickly squashed by seeing what had actually happened to the MRV. It had been speared by a pipe, and new pipes had grown through and out of it, effectively rooting it in place. This caused immediate debate among the group around one key issue. Did this mean that the MRV was now technically part of the pipes? And by extension, would the pipes feel the need to defend themselves if the databanks were removed from the MRV in order to deliver the readings back to the researchers at Site-17? While Lon and Agent 2 carefully discussed the issue, Agent 6 lost his temper and decided to show these 2 foolish kids how it was done. He claimed the two of them were worrying about a bunch of Foundation hooey that they were inexperienced and gullible enough to believe, as if this bunch of weird pipes was actually dangerous. It was like how every 6 anomalies there's apparently one capable of ending the world. It's all a bunch of overblown, fear-mongering nonsense. And to prove that he wasn't just all talk on this front, Agent 6 pried open the top of the MRV and slid out the data cards, which seemed to be covered in some kind of viscous, unpleasant liquid from the pipes that had penetrated the device. Still, he'd gotten what they came for. He could have done this whole thing alone without this pair of bedwetters. He scoffed and said, "Kids, I don't know how you two survive." But he shouldn't have spoken so soon. The large pipe that he didn't even realize he was standing on opened up beneath his feet, and seconds later he was immersed up to his shoulders in it. 6 began to let out the most horrifying shrieks you've ever heard, and when Agent 2 and Lon ran over to try and help him out, they realized why. The pipe below Agent 6 was filled with flowing molten iron. By the time they pulled Agent 6 out, well, Agent 6 from the shoulders up, considering that was all that was left, he was already dead. And despite the actual aggressor being destroyed, SCP-015 wasn't done. It was ready to clean house. As Agent 2 and Lon attempted to flee, some eye-level pipes around them burst, firing crystallized glass into their faces, cutting into their skin and eyes. But they needed to push on, despite the pain, if they wanted to survive and get out. The two of them ran, horrifying noises of twisting and bursting pipes roaring behind them. Pipes made of thorns and bones started to grow, blocking off their exits until they were trapped. Lon, utilizing her small frame, was able to crawl through a gap in the pipes into an adjoining chamber. 2 was given a horrifying surprise when a pipe burst near his hand, showering his flesh in thick, corrosive gunk. His hand melted away at the wrist. As Lon called for help in the tiny cramped chamber she was locked in, 2 ran off to try and find an exit where he could bring more people in to help them. But it would already be too late for poor Lon. A thick, honey-like substance began bleeding into the chamber, disgusting in its overpowering saccharine flavor and goopy, viscous thickness. The chamber seemed to get smaller and smaller as Lon screamed as the honey level rose. Eventually, it got higher than her mouth and nose could reach. She gave a horrifying final gurgle, and then she was gone, entombed forever between the pipes. Agent 2 kept running. His flashlight was beginning to die, but he didn't care. As his eyes bled from the splinters of glass and what was left of his hand dripped from the jagged nub of his wrist, all he could do was keep moving forwards. He panted and screamed and stumbled in the dark until he tripped on something he didn't notice and pitched forwards. He tumbled into the gaping maw of a nearby pipe, surrounded by unseeable, unknowable ooze. As he tumbled further down into the seemingly infinite darkness, it was too dark to see and too cramped to move anywhere but straight down. All he could do was scream and scream and scream, until his voice was hoarse and his throat bled, though nobody was there to even hear his cries. Days later, when his skin started to shred off, it was almost welcome. Dr. Gears would later receive the news of this tragically failed mission and the 3 operatives now declared MIA because of it. He sighed and wrote up his report on the matter, closing with the sentence, "Data deemed non-vital in light of lost staff. SCP-015 classification level review suggested."
Congratulations. You've just entered the employ of the SCP Foundation as a junior researcher. As you know, the Foundation doesn't just hand out positions like this to anyone. To get scouted as part of their research corps, you need to be one of the best and brightest. You're going to be working with strange, mind-bending, and sometimes even deadly anomalies on a daily basis. You're part of the thin, redacted line between normalcy and absolute chaos of the supernatural. But right now, only one question is on your mind. Where will you actually be working? Because here's the thing. The SCP Foundation is a worldwide organization devoted to the containment of the anomalous, and they have thousands of classified sites in areas across the globe, each of them specializing in a different subset of the strange. Depending on your particular area of expertise, there's a number of foundation facilities you may hope to be assigned to, but that's not what we're talking about today. Instead, we're focusing on the sites and areas so dangerous that just getting assigned there feels kind of like a demotion to D class. The places with the deadliest anomalies and the most frightening locales. That's right. It's time to cross your fingers and hope for the best. Because today we're going to discuss the most dangerous SCP Foundation sites and areas. But first, there are some things we need to understand about Foundation facilities in general. If you're somewhat familiar with the world of the SCP Foundation, you've probably heard phrases like research site and biological containment area thrown around a lot. You may have even picked up most of the meanings from context clues. But before we throw you into even more dangerous uncharted waters, we're gonna break down the labels for you. The Foundation has secure facilities all over the world, and they deal with a wide range of different anomalies. So these facilities often have to specialize to suit the requirements of their specific task. For starters, the terms site and area aren't interchangeable. Sites are covert Foundation facilities that often exist relatively close to civilian populations, so as not to arouse suspicion from the public or rival groups like the Chaos Insurgency. They disguise themselves as boring government and corporate buildings. Areas, on the other hand, typically have to contain much more dangerous anomalies. Areas tend to not only be much larger than sites, they're also further away from civilian population centers. There's no cover story here. The areas are just entirely hidden. They also often have some pretty crazy failsafe measures in case of a large containment breach, like one or even multiple thermonuclear warheads designed to detonate and blow the facility to kingdom come, if things ever get truly out of control. It goes without saying that you'd probably rather be assigned to a site rather than an area, if you're risk-adverse. Both types of facilities are divided into sections or sectors, which in some cases are further divided into units. Units typically are small, high-security areas devoted to the extensive containment of a single anomaly, or several closely related anomalies. Now that you know the two types of facilities, let's talk prefixes. The handy little descriptor that often clues you in to how a Foundation site or area has specialized. There are 10 possible prefixes for a facility, and we'll take you on a quick crash course through those before we start getting dangerous. Armed, as in armed site, armed area, or armed section, refers to a facility or section that possesses a large quantity of firepower and could mean military-grade weaponry, vehicles, or just a large number of permanent armed guards. Armed facilities tend to be more dangerous to work in, either due to a greater threat of containment breach or due to a high possibility of attacks from the outside. Biological or bio implies that the facility or area deals with infectious or biohazardous anomalies that would make catching the Black Plague feel like a spa day. Containment is an obvious one. These sites or areas that are, you guessed it, built for containing anomalies. Dimensional containment facilities or sections often contain dangerous pocket dimensions, or gateways into other dimensions. Humanoid containment facilities or sections deal largely with intelligent human or human-like anomalies, capable of understanding and following instructions. They're similar to standard prisons, but for anomalous people. Protected facilities and sections are anomaly-free safe zones, so we won't be discussing them much here. Provisional facilities are typically temporary facilities built around an anomaly that couldn't be feasibly transported to a pre-existing facility. The rare reliquary facilities or sections are designed to hold anomalous artifacts of a religious or historical nature. Research facilities or sections either research the anomalies themselves or work on devising new containment methods. And storage facilities are designed to store non-anomalous items long-term. The Foundation also has observation outposts, but with some rare exceptions, your greatest risk at one of these is dying of boredom. With that out of the way, let's get to what we've all been waiting for. The scariest, deadliest, and most overall dangerous facilities on the Foundation roster. The places you'd never want to be assigned to if your life depended on it. And in this case, it really does. First, we'll discuss the most dangerous sites, and then the most dangerous areas. So grab your Foundation-issued sidearm, and let's go. First, Site 19. It shouldn't be surprised that the largest operating Foundation site is also the one containing some of the most famous and deadly prisoners. Two in particular are the one you can't look away from, and another that puts you in lifelong mortal danger if you look at it. These are SCP-173 the Sculpture and SCP-689 the Statue of Death. If you get assigned to Site 19, there's a possibility you may suddenly find yourself with a snapped neck while filling in spreadsheets. And if you so much take a glance at SCP-689, you'll be declared an E-Class, and possibly even terminated by your superiors. Second, Provisional Site 4511, home of SCP-4511, also known as the Swine God. This giant pig-shaped furnace has had a terrifying effect on the Foundation personnel stationed at the site. In just a few weeks, it had seemingly rational researchers and guards performing brutal sacrifices in its name and descending into an occult hell. It's happened at least once already, and is extremely likely to happen again, so you definitely want to avoid being deployed here. But the most deadly site of all is one that doesn't even come from our universe. Site 13, also known as SCP-1730. This site, run by Director Elliot Emerson, functioned like an anomaly slaughterhouse in another dimension. Anomalies were murdered and burned, and dissenting Foundation employees were treated horrifically. But when Director Emerson happened to turn on the reality-warping Thresher machine, this site became a full-blown nightmare filled with escaped SCPs, mimetic hazards, otherworldly nightmare gods, and a truly unsavory entity nicknamed Leech Boy, who is quite interested in drinking your blood. If you can even survive long enough in Site 13 to meet him, that is. Of course, it's the secure Foundation areas where the horrors really unfold. These can make some of the worst sites look mild in comparison. Let's take a look at some of the Foundation's most dangerous areas. First, Containment Area 25B. This area is not only 200 meters beneath the ocean, it's also one of the most heavily fortified, and one of the few to actually detonate its on-site nuclear warhead in the past. That's because this is the containment area for SCP-076, also known as Able. This anomaly has frequent and extreme violent containment breach attempts, often brutally slaughtering staff in the process with his deft swordsmanship. Accepting a job here is a great way to fast-track yourself into becoming human sushi. Next up is Area 354. This facility houses SCP-354, also known as the Blood Pond, a slowly expanding pool of red liquid that habitually unleashes dangerous monsters that attack the guards stationed there. These include giant bats, huge metal spheres releasing concentrated radiation beams, a giant reptilian humanoid impervious to gunfire, and an invisible robotic Terminator entity that managed to murder 90% of the attending guards before being killed itself. In other words, not a recipe for stable employment. Area 126 is dangerous for a number of reasons. First, that it's located inside war-torn Damascus, Syria, and thus sometimes come under threat from shelling operations. Second, because it contains SCP-3989. This spatial anomaly in the middle of an olive orchard turned out to be a front for a terrifying Sarkic dimension full of fleshy abominations. What's more, simply being in this area slowly caused the staff to lose their minds and become devoted to the Sarkic deities hidden within the dimension. And much like the Blood Pond, it's believed that this area of influence is actively growing day by day. Meaning if you work at Area 126, it's actually getting less safe with each moment that passes. Next, Arm Reliquary and Containment Area 02. This base is specifically designed to contain highly dangerous, hostile, or otherwise hazardous anomalies, including multiple Keter-class objects. And we're not kidding when we say dangerous and hostile. The anomalies housed on this site are so dangerous, there's a literal battalion of armed guards to keep the peace. It also has not one, but multiple fail-safe nuclear weapons, designed to literally erase the entire base from existence if ever there's a catastrophic containment breach. One particularly horrifying anomaly in Area 02 is SCP-743. This is a seemingly innocent chocolate fountain that actually contains billions of extremely violent ant-like creatures that will swarm anything nearby, tearing it to pieces and dragging the pieces back to their nest inside the fountain. These insects will stop at nothing and can even tear through titanium if they need to in order to get their desired sustenance. So being present in this area means your life is constantly at risk. Hope you like chocolate. Next is the dreaded Armed Biological Containment Area 14, which contains some of the deadliest biological anomalies out there, from the bloodthirsty, kill-crazed Heart of Darkness SCP-058, to the head-devouring cannibal giant SCP-082, to the voice-imitating, memory-wiping Red Pack Hunters SCP-939. This base also houses several fast-breeding killer parasites, and a few highly infectious and deadly diseases. While Area 14 does boast an entire army of guards with heavy military hardware for preventing all these terrifying monsters from breaching containment and causing havoc, that probably won't make you feel much better. If even one of these things escapes at any given time, you better hope for your family's sake that you have a good life insurance policy. And finally, Area 37. As it stands, being sent to this area pretty much guarantees either death or a fate even worse than dying. That's because Area 37 is no longer under the control of the SCP Foundation. Instead, it's become a twisted playground for SCP-1765, a trio of terrifying reality warpers known as the Sisters. These unstoppable monsters claimed the area as their own, and began performing sickening experiments such as being forced into maddening time loops designed to drive you insane, or being crushed and burned to death in deadly games with confusing rules. While heading into other areas offers the possibility of a gruesome fate, Area 37 offers a dead certainty. Now, not only do you know the difference between different types of sites and areas, you now know some of the most horrifying and deadly examples of each, so you know which to avoid. But look on the bright side. If you're hard up for work and the SCP Foundation seems like an appealing job, at least you know there will likely always be a position available at one of these sites. After all, positions here open up very frequently. Salvation, Indiana was your typical Midwestern American town. The kind of place where everyone knew each other, where everyone was comfortable leaving their doors unlocked at night, where there was a sense of trust between neighbors that you couldn't find in a more populated area. The kind of place where word traveled fast, and where people talked about things that were improper in hushed voices behind the backs of others. In Salvation, being an outsider or deviating from the norm was akin to complete isolation. You either fit in or you got out, and if you didn't, Salvation had its ways of making you conform to the mold. Gossip, organized stalking efforts, discrimination. These small-town methods were often employed by the town's inner circle to keep those who they had a distaste for in check. And unfortunately, this cliquish mentality can be the norm when it comes to small towns. There's nothing anomalous about the ugliness of human nature. But Salvation did have its secrets, the kind that, if brought to light, would tear a small town apart. The kind that attracted the attention of the US government's Unusual Incidents Unit, a branch of the Federal Bureau of Investigation that dealt with the paranormal and supernatural, the US government's answer to the SCP Foundation. Between June 18th and June 23rd, 1976, the town of Salvation, Indiana underwent swaths of extreme anomalous activity that affected the town's entire population, but was mainly centered around Salvation's high school, appropriately named, well, Salvation High School. 2 UIU agents were dispatched to Salvation to assess the reports of anomalous activity, record it, and of course help cover it up. This was one of the few times the UIU got the jump on an anomalous incident before a larger, more prominent organization such as the SCP Foundation or the Global Occult Coalition Bet they got a company pizza party for that one. The operation went smoothly, with the agents using an early amnestic labeled Chemical 110 to wipe the memories of the townsfolk after interviewing them. Although in later years, study of Chemical 110 would prove it to be incredibly dangerous, as the amnestic was both toxic and had a degrading, damaging effect on human memory centers. Between this and the Foundation's early amnestic models also proving to be incredibly dangerous, the 1970s were an interesting time indeed in the field of supernatural cover-up operations. The timeline of events the agents established depicted an eerie scene. It was only a few days, but what occurred was both horrifying and strange. On Sunday night, 10th grade students at Salvation High School reported hearing what they described as someone trying to speak under the ground while passing by the school on their way home from a church service. One student reported it to her mother, who ignored it entirely. On Monday, an 11th grade student of Salvation High School claimed during gym class that he could hear voices coming from underneath the school's pool. Several other students corroborated this story. When school officials came to investigate, they didn't find anything unusual, but the UIU agents found that the lining of the bottom of the pool was cracked. On the same day, several female students reported seeing faceless things instead of their own reflections in a bathroom mirror. They did not seem bothered by this. During lunch announcements, many students described being able to hear a third voice alongside the two other students speaking unintelligibly below the broadcast. Curiously, the agents found that the PA room, where the broadcast originated from, sat in a media center near the pool. On Tuesday, students arriving at school noticed that the Indiana state flag was more than 3 meters above the top of the flagpole, attached to nothing, just floating. The American flag was not found, and more importantly, the students claimed they could see 9 female figures hanging by ropes from the flagpole, who disappeared immediately after being seen. During a biology class, one student suddenly stood up and rolled their eyes to the back of their head. They descended suddenly into the floor and disappeared entirely. Shortly after, they reappeared above a ceiling panel in the center of the room. No other students were able to identify the student, and several of their classmates insisted that their actions were just a joke. The UIU agents were unable to find proof of the student's existence in Salvation's enrollment records. Similarly, students described yet another student they didn't recognize walking the halls of the high school. They were unable to define any details of their appearance, save for one thing that stood out. They wore a purple satchel with the word syncope embroidered on the side. A custodian reported seeing something staring at him, standing at the bottom of the school pool. On Wednesday, the horror only sped up, as school staff noted that there was a full 2 inches of water across all levels of the school. For whatever reason, the school's principal decided not to close the school. At 7:56 a.m., the entirety of the student body heard an unknown voice whisper the word "hello" in their right ear. Members of the school band realized their instruments no longer produced any sound, but whenever they played, they reported seeing a small, black, human-shaped entity flickering in and out of view in the corner of the room, facing the wall. One student saw a dark figure walking up and away from the school through the air at an impossible angle. Eventually, the figure disappeared from her sight and was never seen again. No other student addressed this. On Thursday, a student in gym class avoided a dodgeball as it phased through his body. He sunk into the floor screaming for help. Nobody who noticed seemed motivated enough to help him. The entire school shifted roughly 1 foot off of its foundations at 11 a.m. The vice principal, who was sent to inspect the building's integrity, described seeing something small with too many faces grinning at him from underneath the building before the school inexplicably resettled back to its original position. The boys' locker rooms disappeared and were replaced with what witnesses described as something that screamed. They were unable to provide any details. As students left for the day, they saw 9 young women hanging in the air, tilted forward at an angle above the school's parking lot. They could be silently mouthing words, and their appearances were described by witnesses as ugly and unremarkable. They vanished, and again the majority of the town residents reported hearing a child's voice say the word hello below them upon the figure's disappearance. A panic ensued, as town officials had no explanation for these events. Salvation's principal made the call to close the school on Friday. However, when Friday morning arrived, the entire student body showed up for school. The building was locked. so the students simply waited outside to be let in. No individuals could describe why they were there. There was a knock on a window, and the students saw a small black entity standing outside of a second-story classroom. An entity phased in and out of the school's windows over and over until suddenly disappearing. After this, the front door unlocked itself, and the mass gathering of students entered the building. However, what they found was unlike the small school they had come to know over the years. Inside, Salvation High School was transformed into a non-Euclidean space, meaning that reality didn't work inside it the way it should. Hallways that led right instead led downward. Stairs that went up instead curved left. As the students moved through the school, they couldn't help but feel like they were always moving down, lower and lower. Some heard whispers, others heard drums in the distance. As they approached the basement, they saw a massive stone archway. Suddenly, the students shifted, encasing the entire group in rock and earth for 20 seconds. After this brief, suffocating torture ended, the students reappeared back in the school, except this time, every one of them reported being the only one in the building. They described the experience wandering the building alone before coming to what they called a doorway below a doorway, and ended up inside a small sub-basement room. There they saw 3 mysterious visions. A woman crouched over a body of water, surrounded and covered in blood. A farmhouse and a group of trees that were burning. 9 white humanoid figures floating in the air overhead. A weeping woman digging in a field until her hands began to rot and fall apart. When these visions subsided, the black entity reappeared again. It whispered hello, and the group of students were suddenly surrounded by 9 screaming female figures. After this, the students reappeared inside their own homes. It was at this point that the UIU began to enter the town to distribute amnestics to the subjects. More anomalous activity was recorded in rapid succession. Bodies hanging in the sky, water taps leaking human hair and mucus instead of water. Individuals reported that their facial features had disappeared entirely. Others reported seeing faceless creatures in the town. The black entity frantically appearing and reappearing in rapid succession throughout the town. Even a weeping young woman running back into the school's building, who witnesses lost after she entered the school's basement. The cover-up effort was brutal, but it worked. The townspeople of Salvation were convinced that they saw hallucinations as a result of toxic gases blown south from a factory up north. But what was the connection between all the phenomena? 9 faceless female entities, water, and blood. Something that literally upsets the entire foundation of Salvation High School. A small black entity. Adults in the town ignoring the things their children saw and acting indifferent toward them. All this sounds a lot like a dirty, dark secret being unearthed in the town of Salvation. Something people would rather turn a blind eye to and ignore. But they couldn't, because the terror was only getting started. A week after these events occurred, contractors assessing the damage to the school discovered the sub-basement room, where the students had various visions of anomalous entities. Behind it was the entrance that led to the large stone archway. This antechamber was discovered after one of the members of the contracting team slipped and fell beneath a collapsed section of wall and floor that led to the massive area underneath the school. The contracting team attempted to extract them, but they did not succeed. Their disappearance caught the attention of the SCP Foundation, who assessed the school and deemed the area beneath the school to be anomalous, as the building's architecture should not be able to accommodate the size of the area. It was designated SCP-3935, and as the Foundation began investigating it, they were determined to uncover the truth of what really was occurring in Salvation, Indiana. While exploring SCP-3935, they came across the stone archway, a piece of architecture whose origins are unknown. Inscribed on the arch was a phrase that read, "The way below winds deeper, longer, unspeakable its patterns laid, the lost forever damned to wander, this thing a quiet madness made." After the initial establishment of SCP-3935 as an anomalous location, the Foundation poured deeper into Salvation's mystery and came across the documents created by the UIU agents. The Foundation, being much more thorough in their containment methods than the UIU, decided that the small town of 1,400 people was easy enough to relocate entirely. and the entire area could be condemned, feeding into the excuse of a hazardous waste facility nearby, leaking noxious gases into the town's water and air supply. With the townsfolk successfully relocated, Salvation was quarantined and cut off from the rest of the world. Roads were removed and rerouted, and Foundation personnel turned over any trespassers to local authorities. Salvation High School became a hub for Foundation researchers studying SCP-3935 and the events that occurred in the town, and the building was heavily guarded when not in use by the organization. The initial exploration attempt into SCP-3935 was conducted by a team of Foundation agents, shortly after members of the contracting team were lost. There was a slight hope they could be recovered, and the effort was dubbed a search and rescue mission. 3 agents, Ellis, Porter, and Haskell, were tasked with entering SCP-3935, all equipped with recording equipment and a shoulder-mounted lamp system. They entered a cramped, narrow space beyond the archway, where the subterranean stone walls got tighter and tighter, and the air felt stuffy and uneasy. On the walls, images resembling a child's drawings were carved into the rock. As the teams continued to push through the rock tunnel, they found it difficult to breathe. The walls were getting narrower, too close for comfort. Suddenly, Porter's voice cut out, and his camera feed went black. When it came back, it appeared to be looking up at 2 sources of light, most likely the other 2 agents' lamps, as Porter fell from a great distance. His screaming was heard on both the cameras and by the other agents, but they couldn't figure out where he was. Ellis and Haskell began to panic, moving faster and attempting to struggle forward. The rock tunnel was so tight, so constraining, that they were unable to move more than a few steps in a second. After a short period of time, both men fell forward into a larger open space. As they searched for Porter, who wasn't behind them, they came to the conclusion that he must have fallen into a ravine or slipped beneath the rocks. There was no other explanation for how he disappeared so suddenly, but their talk was cut short when they realized what was in front of them. They hadn't noticed it at first, but when they turned their lamps forward, they noticed a gigantic structure, seemingly carved out of stone. It resembled Salvation High School almost perfectly. The main entrance was visible, and the windows too, a stone replica of the school, hidden in this massive underground area. The agents couldn't believe it. There was a thick layer of fog in front of them, but they could make out a narrow stone bridge that extended across a large chasm, leading to the stone replica of the school. As they examined further, they noticed that underneath the school was another model of the school, and under that one was another. It went on indefinitely, extending deeper and deeper into the ground, in the direction that all things in Salvation seemed to go, down. On the other side of the bridge, hanging mid-air, were 9 female entities, their faces obscured by long white hair. The 2 agents stood still in fear. After a short time, the figures appeared 10 meters backwards, and then another 10, and then they appeared right in front of the door of the stone school structure. Slowly, they lifted their heads, revealing their featureless faces to the agents, who recoiled in fear. After that, they disappeared. The 2 agents debated going back for reinforcements, but they pushed onward after hearing the sudden sound of many voices speaking in hushed tones in the distance. It could have been the lost contractors, or their lost man, Porter. They entered the stone school and began searching. Inside, they couldn't make heads or tails of the architecture. As they ran down the hallways, following the sound of the voices, they noticed that the halls seemed to stretch on forever, but they didn't seem to notice the watching, featureless faces who observed the agents from the window panes in the doorways. As the agents came to the auditorium doorway, Agent Haskell let out a scream, and his voice recorder disconnected. At this point, what occurred became nearly impossible to make out on the Foundation's recording. The voices grew louder. Haskell's camera shifted perspective to the floor. 9 female entities appeared around Agent Ellis, contorting their bodies into impossible positions. Haskell ran, but the entities pursued him. He screamed for help. Eventually, the figures hung in the air, unmoving. Haskell slowed down too and slowly turned around, coming face to face with a small black humanoid entity sitting upside down on the ceiling of the hallway. It whispered one word, "Hello." The feed cut out to the choppy sounds of audio distortion. A snapping noise was heard, and then silence. And then all 3 agents' feeds returned. For the duration of the exploration recording, Haskell, Ellis, and Porter lost their minds in the depths of SCP-3935. In between periods of silence, they laughed, screamed, and shouted incoherently, rambling on about how dark it is and how they can't go down any further, below, where it goes on forever, where they can be part of the Nine, be a part of salvation, where they can fall forever. And after that, silence. The feed was cut out completely, and neither the trio nor the contractors were ever recovered. After this failed horrifying exploration attempt, more anomalous activity occurred in the town during the Foundation's occupation. Sightings of the 9 faceless entities in the streets and the trees. An agent who saw the black figure constantly in his peripheral vision. Sounds coming from a grove of trees near the school, which led to a cabin and 9 corpses of former Salvation High School students in the backyard. But before they could investigate, the female entities appeared once more, and they were unable to locate the grove again. The Foundation's investigation of Salvation continued through the decades, interviewing former staff members of the school and residents. They were trying to piece together any semblance of a coherent story, to find a way to connect all these dissonant elements into something understandable. The black figure, the corpses, the buried secrets, and the 9 female entities. How did it all connect to the school? In 2002, a Foundation agent interviewed Mrs. Fletcher, an English teacher at Salvation High School during the period of anomalous activity in 1976. The interview started out ordinarily enough. Fletcher, in her old age, couldn't remember much. She remembered the town was quiet, with a tight-knit community. They didn't even need a police force because there was so little crime. She remembered students would go into the woods and chase ghosts, or claim they saw things, but it was never anything too strange. But as Fletcher continued to talk, she let her mind wander more and more. She recounted how there was a disappearance at the high school, a girl who was last seen by the school's pool. The town assumed she ran away. After all, there were some individuals who held strong opinions in Salvation, the kind of opinions that didn't sit right with some of the younger residents. The church was important in Salvation. Nearly everyone went. Fletcher opened up some more. There was a scandal, she recalled. A teenage girl on the school cheer team who ended up pregnant out of wedlock. She couldn't recall her name or what she looked like, but she remembered the town's inner circle was in an uproar about it. She didn't want them to know. She didn't want anyone to know. It was a secret she could barely keep from spreading. It must have been destroying her, Fletcher explained. She couldn't remember much about the girl, but she did remember that the girl would always say hello to her. Too many times, in fact. Eventually, the girl was found hanging in the woods, right outside of a log cabin. They found a note in her hand, which contained a drawing of a building that resembled the high school, and on its back, the repetition of the same word over and over again. But Fletcher couldn't recall what the word was. The Foundation agent was about to close the interview out, but he had one last thing to ask. He produced a picture of the unidentified 9 female figures that were haunting the town and showed it to Fletcher. She became noticeably pale and short of breath. "Do you know anything about this, Mrs. Fletcher?" the agent said. She collected herself and examined the image as best as she could, her hand shaking.
Why, yes I do. Those are, the cheerleaders. They were, well, let me think. There were 10 of them, though, I think. Unless something happened to one of them, there were definitely 10.
The Foundation didn't have to ask what happened to the 10th. Foundation researcher Marcus Hernandez was a professional in all aspects of his job. He was intelligent, being scouted for a job at the Foundation right out of college. He was brave, unyielding in the faces of the horrifying creatures and dangerous situations that working with the anomalous practically guaranteed. But most importantly, researcher Hernandez was cautious. He not only knew that keeping his hands at a fair distance from any newly discovered anomalous objects was a safe way to keep his head, he was also aware that it was sometimes better to take risks that would further his knowledge about an anomaly and how best to contain it. Sometimes those risks came with a price, like being part of the first team to study a recently discovered anomaly. To researcher Hernandez, it was better to lose the lives of the ones working to protect humanity from what lies in the dark than have any unsuspecting civilians stumble upon something potentially life-threatening. That's why he and his team took the assignment of studying SCP-1437 before anyone else in the Foundation was able to. They simply were not sure of what it was capable of, and researcher Hernandez's known attention to detail and cautious nature could best help the Foundation not only establish proper containment procedures, but also ensure that their own personnel were safe while doing so. As researcher Hernandez sat in the back of a jeep that rolled and tumbled over the arid landscape of the Mojave Desert, he reviewed what the Foundation knew about the anomaly. Unfortunately, it wasn't much. For starters, it was a 3-meter by 3-meter hole in the ground, originally thought to be an ordinary cave. As a result of its deceiving appearance, the anomaly went unnoticed for decades, until the Foundation picked up on a local story that was the talk of the town for a small group of camping and hiking hobbyists in Nevada. A camper, while out exploring and trekking through the dry dunes of the Mojave, was struck in the back of the neck with a U.S. quarter. While the object by itself is harmless, it came flying at the camper's body at an incredibly high speed, shooting from a large hole in the ground and striking hard enough to break the skin and wedge itself inside the camper's neck. After reaching the local hospital and getting the coin removed, it still left a small scar across the back of the camper's head. This unusual event prompted Foundation reconnaissance, which turned out to be entirely warranted, as observation of the surrounding area found several more objects buried around the area that were believed to have emerged from the hole, now designated as SCP-1437. A small canoe decorated with luminescent patterns, a calculator that added and subtracted letters instead of numbers, and a rotten apple core were all objects strewn around the immediate area. And if that's not strange enough, attempts to map out the hole failed, as all measuring equipment was lost after reaching a certain depth. Before the initial observation team picked up and left, SCP-1437 shot out large quantities of rock and dirt for over an hour, confirming that objects emerged from the hole at high speeds. Chemical analysis of the objects found around the area showed that they were composed of materials either unknown or not commonly found on Earth to warrant use in mass production. The observation team came up with a hypothesis. SCP-1437 was a hole that led to a parallel universe, and the objects it shot out originated in said location. Researcher Hernandez knew that this was just a hypothesis, but he had reviewed the lab results himself. Those objects certainly did not come from anywhere on Earth, and if the hole functioned as a gateway between worlds, that could explain why the measuring equipment was lost after a certain point. The jeep came to a stop, and when researcher Hernandez stepped out, he came face to face with SCP-1437, a large hole sitting in the Mojave Desert. His crew was already hard at work, surveying and excavating the surrounding area for any other objects the hole had shot out that had been lost to time. A mobile analysis lab tent was set up in the distance, as well as several trailers for personnel living on site. Researcher Hernandez's personal decision to not use D-Class personnel in his research meant that each risk the SCP-1437 team took had to be calculated differently. They wouldn't send a person into the hole and risk loss of life when a drone could serve the same function without the potential drawbacks. But still, the initial observation team lost all of their equipment while trying to measure SCP-1437's depth. Why waste an expensive drone when the result would most likely turn out the same? It was these decisions that earned Hernandez's fame and respect at the Foundation, and over the next few weeks, his team was able to develop a wide knowledge base regarding SCP-1437 and establish safe containment procedures to keep the anomaly hidden from the public and easy to work with for Foundation personnel. First, a 2-meter-tall electric fencing unit was built around the perimeter of SCP-1437. This fence would not only keep unwanted trespassers out, but also had defensive capabilities due to the harmful electrical charge it could emit upon contact with an object. Groups of 3 security guard personnel were assigned to patrol this fence at all times, and they were instructed to deal with any trespassers through standard Foundation protocol. They would be taken into custody, interrogated, and as long as they were unaware of SCP-1437's anomalous properties, given a healthy dose of amnestics and released back into the general public. Anything that emerged from SCP-1437, be it a physical object or a living organism,
would be cataloged by the Foundation and tested immediately for any potential hazards before further analysis could begin. If found to be safe, the items would be studied as much as possible. If not, they were stowed away in an area intended to keep them contained until a safe way to examine them was found. But perhaps the most important containment procedure researcher Hernandez established was the forbiddance of testing with SCP-1437. Due to the anomaly's mysterious nature and incredibly likely potential connection to parallel universes, testing could have grave and unforeseen consequences. When dealing with alternate or parallel timelines or realities, the Foundation is incredibly cautious and only interacts in ways that they're absolutely sure will not have any unexpected damage on baseline reality. That, and researcher Hernandez wasn't exactly keen on attracting the attention of these parallel universes without a solid understanding of who and what they were. As he would come to find, this inclination proved to be beneficial. As the team observed SCP-1437, they documented a number of notable objects that emerged from the hull, each supposedly originating from a parallel world. The first of which, however, was not anything the team hadn't seen before. The initial observation team sent to test whether SCP-1437 was actually anomalous had observed the hull emitting a mass of rock and dirt. For over an hour, SCP-1437 spewed earthen materials without stopping, filling the surrounding areas with debris. Since this was before the research team theorized the hull was connected to parallel realities, they weren't sure what to make of it. Was it a natural eruption? A poorly documented earthquake that somehow sent chunks of rock and dirt to the surface and shooting out of the hole? Though somewhat stumped, researcher Hernandez's team eventually came to a single solid conclusion. If SCP-1437 led to a parallel world or worlds, whoever was on the other side of the hole may have been attempting to fill it using natural materials. If they were attempting to fill it, could they be trying to contain it? Did the parallel world on the other side of SCP-1437 have its own foundation? This sudden thought gave researcher Hernandez pause and made him reconsider his hands-off approach to SCP-1437. Should his team attempt to contact whoever was on the other side? If it was a parallel branch of the Foundation, this behavior would be encouraged. The Foundation communicated with alternate versions of itself in time and space all of the time. The Department of Temporal Anomalies was built around this premise. But these were exceptions, not the rules. And communication with alternate foundations was always carried out with utmost safety and precaution. It was only done when there was a certainty that risk would be avoided. Researcher Hernandez was sure he made the correct decision, and he would stray away from attempting to contact those on the other side of the anomaly, even if they were another world's incarnation of the SCP Foundation. Weeks later, researcher Hernandez was awoken in the middle of the night by an excited assistant who, after calming herself down, informed him that SCP-1437 had spat out a new object. You have to forgive her. If you were out in the desert for weeks staring at a hole waiting for it to do something and it eventually did it, you'd be pretty excited too. When researcher Hernandez ran outside to see what the team was freaking out about, he could have jumped for joy too. SCP-1437 wasn't spitting out rocks and dirt anymore. This time, it was a map, clearly illustrated to depict the continent of North America. But upon closer inspection, the team noticed some very apparent differences from a traditional map in the geography of our world. The map was written entirely in Spanish, and the names of countries and states it listed didn't match their existing counterparts. In fact, the entire borderlines of the map were mismatched, out of place, and radically different from anything resembling North America. It listed the government of the entire continent of North America as La República Popular de Aguas Nuevas, or when translated to English, the People's Republic of New Waters. This exciting find was logged and archived, and it was only the first of a series of objects that emerged from SCP-1437. A few days later, another object was documented. This time, it was a photograph. After initial scans determined the object to be safe to view, not harboring any dangerous mimetic triggers upon viewing or anything of that nature, the team analyzed the picture to the best of their abilities. They saw a breathtaking vista of a city skyline, unlike anything possible on this world. Intertwined with buildings were massive structures that appeared to be made out of coral. They wrapped around skyscrapers, branching from the ground and sometimes emerging from the buildings themselves.
The coral broke through the tops of the tallest buildings, putting the man-made titans to shame. In the far background, a massive flying creature can be seen peacefully floating through the air. This otherworldly visual overwhelmed the team, but after the initial shock wore down, a keen-eyed junior researcher pointed out that many of the buildings resembled known landmarks, though they were radically altered in noticeable ways. This wasn't just any city. It was New York City, only this time with coral and giant floating creatures. Exactly what the Big Apple's been missing this entire time. But this was still comprehensible and understandable for the Foundation. SCP-1437's true weirdness was still yet to come. A few days after the photograph emerged, SCP-1437 shot out a truly peculiar find. Researcher Hernandez and his team were stumped as to what its purpose was and what it signified, but they determined the objects to be completely safe and archived them regardless. The items in question were a series of discs made from solid gold, varying in size but never being obscenely large. Accompanying the disc was a sheet of paper that read, "Please send more rain." The Foundation was understandably puzzled. One working theory researcher Hernandez put together was that whoever was on the opposite side of SCP-1437 was paying tribute to the whole as a form of worship and was asking the almighty beings on the other side to send more rain for whatever reason. While the Foundation didn't exactly send the rain over themselves, whoever sent that request was probably pleased when a thunderstorm the next week sent torrents of rainwater into SCP-1437. We hope they're happy. The most notable discoveries that emerged from SCP-1437 occurred over a multi-year period. Previously, the research team theorized that SCP-1437 was connected to a single reality, and that whoever was on the other side of it was sending objects through, either by chance or by means of communication. This discovery proved that there wasn't just one parallel world connecting to SCP-1437, but many, an unknown amount, in fact. The items in question this time weren't just objects, but human cadavers. One by one over the years, interspersed between the various oddities that SCP-1437 also spat out were human corpses, dead on arrival. The bodies were clad in Foundation-issue D-Class uniforms, though with some slight variations. This proved that the worlds connected to SCP-1437 were, in fact, alternate versions of the Foundation, or at least some of the worlds, as there was no way to tell who, what, or where the objects that emerged from SCP-1437 came from. Researcher Hernandez and his team examined the bodies with care and determined that they were dead long before they hit the ground, and that the gateway between worlds triggered the cause of death as they traveled between realities. Inside the D-Class jumpsuits, the team discovered pieces of paper, manuscripts that detailed their world's Foundation's documentation on SCP-1437. This deliberate inclusion of documentation signaled to the research team that there was an attempt at communication and cooperation from one world's Foundation to theirs. But why? The first body was clearly in adequate physical condition. It was protected due to being clothed in a pressure suit with an attached oxygen supply. The documentation read similarly to the SCP Foundation's documentation, though instead of special containment procedures and an object class, SCP-1437 was given a safety rating and safety containment procedures. These detail the Foundation that was giving civilians tours of their anomalies, where they could take photographs and even get close enough to view the anomaly from a close distance. The rest of the file was similar to what Hernandez's team recorded, and listed the following objects as those that emerged from SCP-1437. One small pyramid composed of concrete, large quantities of dirt and rocks, a landscape painting, believed to be a location in Scotland. According to the painting, its originating universe's sun is blue and its sky yellow. Several discs made from solid gold. Accompanying the discs was a sheet of paper reading, "Please stop plague." A photograph of several scientists. All scientists pictured have unusually long fingers, estimated to be nearly 25 centimeters long. A sheet of paper reading, "Thank you, please send more gifts." The file continued with a notice explaining that the bodies of orange jumpsuited individuals holding documentation of the anomaly emerged from the hole. The file's unfamiliarity with jumpsuits indicate that this world lacks a concept of D-Class personnel. The file mentions that, on the 15th of August 2012, a volunteer from the Foundation, Marco Perton, entered SCP-1437 wearing safety gear, taking with him a copy of this document. The
The second D-Class body examined by Hernandez's team was branded with the phrase, "Property of the SCP Corporation." The file described an item with a threat level of little, and a foundation that was more focused on profit than containment. After objects emerged from the hole, they were authorized to be sold to any interested collectors. Objects described by this version of the Foundation include a statue of what is believed to be a reptilian entity sporting numerous eyes and tails, large quantities of dirt and rocks, a glass bottle of water, a human femur covered in saliva, a cube comprised of several smaller cubes, all of which are different colors, purpose unknown, a soccer ball, ball only has 5 sides. The file included the SCP Corporation describing D-Class showing up, as they did in other worlds, and then the Corporation happily sending several D-Classes of their own through the hole in an attempt to communicate with whoever was on the other side. The third D-Class body examined was heavily bandaged and appeared to be blinded. There were lacerations on its arms and legs, and its tongue had been removed. The file described a foundation akin to a religious cult. SCP-1437 was given a heathen level of unforgivable, and its holding measures described a high priest having to bless the hole every 2 years, and the need to perform blood sacrifices into it to ward off any demons. The wild incarnation of the Foundation interpreted SCP-1437 as a portal to the underworld, and described a list of objects emerging from it. It read as follows: several discs made from solid gold. Accompanying the disc was a sheet of paper reading, "Please kill foes." Large quantities of dirt and rocks, believed to be an attempt by demons to harm the High Priest, who was present at the holding site at the time. The broken remains of a human arm, covered in saliva. A photograph of a metal bird flying away from a city. What appears to be a large mushroom is visible behind the bird, believed to be an attempt by demons at mocking us. A human eye which moved when touched, believed to be a lesser demon, was burnt immediately. Unlike the other worlds, when this one received D-Classes through SCP-1437, the religious fanatics believed the bodies to be demons wearing the skin of men and threw the bodies back in the hole. The next D-Class body observed by Hernandez's team was the most curious. It was a heavily emaciated child who had apparently been lobotomized. It described a foundation that sounds more like an organization out of a dystopian science fiction novel than anything else. The file spoke of a group of beings referred to as our masters above all, which the Foundation answered to. Any objects emerging from SCP-1437 were brought before the Masters. Any trespassers were interrogated by the Masters. This Foundation believed the objects SCP-1437 shot out were gifts for the Masters. Their list reads as follows: 1. Diamond. Large quantities of dirt and rocks. Bark from the extinct Quercus buckii, the lower half of a human body. Delivering to supervising servant of our masters above. It is currently unknown how the gift sender was aware of the diet of our masters above. A document was sent into SCP-1437 thanking the gift giver for the object and requesting further tributes to our masters above. A bottle of human-intended wine. While they certainly enjoyed the food of the human body, the wine was clearly misinterpreted. For whatever reason, this Foundation interpreted the wine as an assassination attempt on the Masters above all. As a result, they sent a large, anomalously powered explosive through SCP-1437 and into the world of an unsuspecting Foundation. The file continues with a notice from this Foundation's 05-1 which reads, "This is a reminder of why we must be vigilant in our containment procedures. From now on, I don't want any of these gifts being taken out of containment. They are a clear and present danger to our masters above." Looks like researcher Hernandez had the correct idea about not wanting to risk experimenting with SCP-1437. Attracting the attention of a reality where the almighty O5 Council answers to an even more powerful human-eating group of masters above all? No thank you. This reality's Foundation is perfectly content alone.
SCP-1730 is one of the biggest threats the Foundation has ever faced. SCP-1730 does not exist. It was June 5th when the compound was first discovered, a large complex of structures in rural Texas, about 15 kilometers northwest of the Mexican border, located in Big Bend Ranch State Park. It was easily the biggest structure in the area, but there was no record of any such structure ever being built. A massive network of power stations, containment facilities, and research buildings SCP-1730 looked like it had been abandoned for a long time. The exterior was degraded, but the building was still operating. A power generator had been running for an indeterminate amount of time. Even as the infrastructure degraded, power flickered through the site and fuel leaked frequently, but there was one detail that attracted the attention of SCP brass. SCP-1730 bore identifying markings linking it to Foundation Site 13, a research facility that was marked for construction near Nome, Alaska. But Site 13 had never been built, having been abandoned in the planning stages. So why is it in the middle of Texas, fully constructed and long abandoned? The Foundation needed to know more, and they needed their best to investigate. It was time to call in the Game Wardens. Apollo 3, the mobile task force used to investigate dangerous sites, was brought in, and 5 elite agents were briefed and sent in: Ross, Houston, Noah, Ohalo, and Vigo. It didn't take long for them to discover that something was very wrong with the site of SCP-1730. The facility was located in the middle of South Texas, but the local flora surrounding it was native to Nome, Alaska. Something had transported a building that shouldn't exist to another place and time. Commander Ross ordered his men to enter, with Houston taking the lead. They discovered that the entry led down a long staircase. They descended slowly, following a strange light that no one could identify, but had a sudden shock when they discovered that the basement of the staircase was missing. The light suddenly stopped, and it became so dark that it was impossible to see what lay beyond the staircase. Upon probing the inky black void at the base of the staircase, they determined it wasn't a fog or shadow. It was a liquid, and it was rising. Ross ordered the men to pull back, but Houston was in too deep. He couldn't break free from the inky black liquid. The men pulled him away and got him free, but his legs were gone. Not ripped off because there was no blood anywhere, smoothly cut off, as if they were never there. And as they put Houston down, he stood up on phantom legs. He didn't feel any pain, but everyone could tell something was very wrong with this place. And the messages they started seeing on the wall made clear they weren't the only ones who knew it. What happened to Site 13? Death here. Not my body. Bleed. There had been other people or things inside SCP-1730, and they wanted anyone who entered to know that this was a very dangerous place to be. As they advanced down the hall back toward the entrance, they saw what looked like a person in the distance, but as they approached, it became clear it wasn't another explorer. It was an old, horribly disfigured corpse, seemingly attached to the wall, not by chains, but fused to the wall in unnatural ways. At first, the team seemed unconcerned, recognizing the corpse as someone named Zachary. Fortunately, command back at the base realized this as the effects of some sort of cognitohazard, a mental infection in the base. They uploaded a filter to their helmets, and the team recoiled in horror at the sight in front of them. But the horrors were just beginning. They turned around to see a shimmering humanoid entity in the hallway behind them. As it approached, its footsteps distorted the hallway around. It pulled AP3 Noah toward it without touching him, and as the soldier was pulled into its clutches, his body started to distort. Vigo was next, being grabbed by the arm by a long appendage, and his arm started to change color and distort. But the Foundation sent Apollo 3 in prepared. Houston produced a portable reality anchor designed to handle reality warping entities, and with a flash of red light, the creature was revealed. It was a horribly elongated humanoid that only existed for a second before the reality anchor erased it and restored the hallway to its normal state. Vigo would recover, with the strange red color in his arm fading eventually. Noah wasn't so lucky. He was already dead and had been fused into the wall just like the unfortunate corpse. These horrors had been encountered just by trying to return to the entrance, so it was clear the only smart thing to do was to descend further into the facilities and get some answers. As they advanced, not encountering any other supernatural entities, they saw more evidence of the dark things that had occurred in Site 13. The infirmary had been torn apart, a cafeteria had been melted into slag, and a large group of containment cells ended with a section called Olympia Class. But while most of the other cells were standard-sized, these were over 100 meters high. What had the Foundation, or whoever ran this place, been keeping in these cells? They would get more answers as they made their way down the hall, where they saw a single television still working and illuminating the hallway. At first, the television flickered, but the image soon cleared, and the agents were able to see what it was broadcasting. It was the interior of a containment cell, and there was someone in it, and they recognized them as one of the most dangerous beings contained by the SCP Foundation, Bobble the Clown, a predatory supernatural clown that inhabits a children's TV show. Bobble the Clown was broadcast by an unknown source and could only be seen by children under 10. Originally seeming to be a normal kids show about a clown, every episode eventually devolved into the murderous Bobble teaching kids how to do horrible things like arson and torture. The Foundation eventually captured and isolated Bobble's broadcast, but the clown remained hostile and vicious. But not here. As the team talked to the Bobble trapped in the mysterious Site-13, it became clear that this clown was broken by whatever it had experienced. It rambled, it hid from the camera, and it was clearly terrified as it told the team about the horrors of the site, and it seemed to recognize the agents as something familiar, but not completely familiar. It claimed to be able to smell them, and it said they smelled different. As Bobble rambled on, the agents learned about a man named Emerson, who ran the site. Like the Foundation, he was obsessed with containing the strange and dangerous entities in the world. But unlike the Foundation, he didn't just want to protect the world from them. He hated them. The entities in Site-13 didn't even have numbers. Emerson wanted to use them up however he wanted and to dispose of them. And something Bobble called the meat grinder. Entities that outlived their usefulness were taken down below and none were ever heard from again. It was directly counter to every SCP Foundation policy, but this site had clearly been performing these horrible experiments for years. How? And why hadn't anyone heard of it? The team continued to make their way into the facility, but their signals were lost as they entered the cryogenics unit. By the time contact had been restored, they were no longer alone. There were survivors, both agents of the Foundation and survivors of the facility, and they were angry. With no way out and massively outnumbered, they called for backup. Mobile Task Force T5, also known as Samsara, was reserved for the heavy-duty missions. They're an elite group of practically immortal cyborgs fashioned from the flesh of a god and equipped with further cybernetic enhancements to eliminate Keter-level threats and to protect themselves from cognitohazards. They were sent in through a drainage gate to look for survivors and neutralize whatever lay within. They didn't know what to expect, but they knew one thing: no one who had been sent in had come out. It wasn't long before they realized how dangerous this mission would be. As they came across some large gated drainage pipes, they could see at least 20 charred bodies of humanoids pushed up against the gate, some reaching their hands through. Whatever had happened in Site-13, these unfortunate beings had been desperate to escape. As they made their way down the drainage pipe, they could feel it getting hotter, as if they were nearing an energy source. And there was one other odd thing about the pipe. It was draining inward, not out. They made their way into a control room where many of the consoles had been destroyed. Looking through a window, their view was obscured by a mysterious black mass. On the control panels, they could read terms like incinerator and body pit access. They split up trying to find answers, but found many of their accesses blocked by the black mass. As the T5 task force argued over their next move, they were startled by a sudden jolt. The giant mass had started moving. The team watched as the mass spun, revealing a giant turbine, which turned the inky substance into a fine slurry that was then scorched by giant streaks of fire. One of the T5 shot open the glass chamber, allowing the team to get closer and blasting them with a wave of heat. As they descended into the chamber, they could see a massive plant-like structure overhead, which started to shake. Suddenly, thousands of glowing pods were released from the massive plant, and each one lit up and let the team view the chamber more clearly. But it was what was inside the pods that was more disturbing. Each pod had a humanoid shape inside, seemingly reaching toward the team until they hit the slurry below and the shadows went dark. The team descended to investigate the slurry when something started to leak out of the walls. Looking at it, they could see something moving within. One of the team members picked up the wriggling object out of the black liquid and it took a bite of his hand. It was a leech, and there were thousands more of them moving toward the slurry, consuming it. And as the leeches ate, they started growing. They seemed to be moving in unison, communicating with a larger being lurking at the base of the slurry. A larger leech, a queen, or something else. The team wasn't sticking around to find out. They beat a hurried escape from the leech room, finding themselves in another hallway. Whatever the black substance was, the entities who had been here had used it, scrawling blood on the walls over and over again. Occasionally, they would come across a drained corpse covered in the black fluid. Had the leeches bled them dry? The facility was so sprawling that the team knew if they wanted any chance of navigating it safely, they needed to get the lay of the land. They needed to find the control center. The door read stairs to cryonics, and the leeches were nowhere to be found. It seemed like a safe path, but as soon as the team entered, the temperature dropped drastically to well below where it would be safe for a human to survive. The team's internal heating system kicked in to save their lives, but it wasn't the only threat. The team was about to encounter exactly what Site-13 was keeping locked up. As soon as they entered the room, sound ceased to work. The filters in their gear were overloaded, and the team saw warnings around the room. Silence. Don't look. A massive multi-limbed figure emerged with each of its 60 arms moving independently. The creature had no head, but a large circular structure covered with ancient glowing symbols. Whatever it was ancient, all-powerful, and deadly. The team scrambled to get away as the glyphs on the creature burned white-hot. Anyone who touched it was burned. Anyone who looked too long at it felt their optical implants burn out. The symbols on the creature were indecipherable, but one word was clear and printed in English: Emerson. Site-13 was from another world, another timeline where the SCP Foundation evolved into something horrible, ruled over by Elliot Emerson. It tortured and captured its beings and eventually killed most of them in the horrors of the incinerators. When an escape threatened to destroy the facility, Emerson successfully activated a device that removed the facility from their world into ours. Of course, as any avid follower of the SCP Foundation will know, there's far more to the story than this. Emerson may have been the start of Site-13's problems, but he was far from the end. We're talking about a tale so epic in size and scope that it would be impossible to fit into one video.
The year is 1941, and the world is gripped by the most violent and widespread war in history. Millions march to war as bloody battles are fought across the globe. Horrendous atrocities are carried out on groups of people, and parts of London are bombed to rubble on a weekly basis. Considering it's only been 20 years since the last World War, it must seem to the early residents of the early 20th century that the world is coming apart at the seams. And amongst the chaos, it'd be easy not to notice a secluded manor house in the English countryside disappearing without a trace for 11 days, before suddenly returning to our reality. But thankfully, one organization makes it its sole duty to notice the unnoticeable and understand the impossible: the SCP Foundation. And within that anomalous manor house, Foundation agents and researchers were about to find horrors beyond even their darkest imaginations. This is the grim tale of SCP-1461, better known as the House of the Worm. When the manor house reappeared after its 11-day absence, the Foundation zeroed in, sending agents inside to investigate. It was a 2-level dwelling complete with 12 bedrooms, 4 baths, 3 studies, a main foyer/ballroom, a library, a kitchen, and a pantry basement. The Foundation observed that a number of these rooms had been fitted with rows of bunk beds, similar to a boarding house or barracks. Only later would they understand why. They found that the upper portion of the home exhibited no abnormal qualities whatsoever. But as the agents investigated further, they found an entrance to the truly anomalous portion of the manor, the extensive sub-level system. No previous records of the building kept by the local council indicated that there would be anything below the manor's basement, so either the mysterious previous occupants, who were nowhere to be found, had built this sub-level, or had just appeared here on its own. Regardless of which was the case, agents and researchers knew that whatever had happened down here had everything to do with the manor's mysterious disappearance. They descended into the depths of what seemed like a man-made cave system, constructed primarily from a mix of concrete, iron, and brass. It was a behemoth of 20th century technology, intricate snaking systems of pipes, gears, and pumping pistons. It was like someone had built an entire factory down here. But for what? The agents began to spread out through the labyrinthian bowels of the manor, hoping to find some answers. But all they seemed to discover was more questions. This place hadn't been built with any form of comprehensible logic. It was full of dead ends, stairways that ascended and descended to nowhere, doors that would open to reveal just walls behind them or not open at all. It was like a maze built by a maniac. It didn't help that it looked like the place was recently hit by an earthquake, with some passages caved in and mangled machinery strewn about. It seemed that no human workers had interfered with the impossibly complex and bizarre machinery in quite some time. A number of the materials used to construct said machinery, as well as the gray sandstone filling in the collapsed passageways, remain unidentified to this day. Already, the sublevel was proving to be a complex puzzle box with only an estimated 75% of its layout ultimately being mapped by Foundation researchers. However, they would soon realize that this place wasn't just confusing, it was deadly. The only method of self-maintenance detected by the exploring agents were pipes that would fire a thick black lubricant onto the surrounding machinery.
One of the Foundation agents had the misfortune of getting covered in it while exploring a darkened passageway, and 80% of his body was melted as a result. It appeared that the viscous black goo was incredibly corrosive to all organic matter. A number of the machines also emitted dangerously high quantities of gamma and X-ray radiation, making it difficult to explore many of the caverns without heavy hazmat protection. And worst of all, were the extremely hostile creatures living in the caves who would regularly attack Foundation personnel. These abominations came to be known as SCP-1461-1, vicious steampunk Frankenstein monsters, once human, but with large parts of their bodies replaced by crude mechanical implants, including metal teeth and claws. 1461-1s have displayed a taste for human flesh, and they have dragged multiple Foundation agents down into their lair to be converted into monsters like them. It's believed that SCP-1461 is capable of controlling these beasts through the strategic use of sound from its brass-speaking pipes, leading them into areas where Foundation personnel are present to instigate conflict. Many of these pitiful creatures have had their throats replaced by phonographs, endlessly repeating the same nonsense phrases over and over again. I am what you have made me. I am choice, and I am tyranny. Forgive me. I am then, and I am now. What gods they will be then. I am evil, and I am flesh. I am the trap. I am beauty, and I am chaos. Children are selfish. I am the worm. I have broken God. Still, in spite of the mazes, monsters, and deadly chemicals, the agents persisted and managed to discover several important locations. The gel production chamber on sublevel 3 creates glass jars from the unidentified sandstone and fills them with a slime that looks to contain living eyes and teeth. The factory deliveries room is filled with a huge number of crates and boxes, which seem to shift and change in number between Foundation patrols. The speaking tube room on sublevel 11 contains a grand pulpit that acts as the connecting point for the complex array of speaking tubes running through the entire cave system. The body parts of a deceased female also appear to be wired into the machinery, like spare parts. And on sublevel 12, they found the so-called catalyst room. Here they discovered a huge, complicated, clockwork and steam-powered machine that appeared to be broken and missing some parts. Most horrifying of all, though, is the raised platform in the center of the catalyst room, on top of which is a metal hospital bed. A desiccated male corpse rests upon the bed, its chest punctured by large syringes connected by tubes to some kind of pumping machine. The parts connecting this pumping machine to the overall apparatus of the room were missing, though, leaving its purpose a mystery. The Foundation assumed that fluids used to be drawn out of this corpse to somehow power the machine. You may be starting to worry that there doesn't seem to be any answers here, that this house is one big mystery. But lucky for you, you're wrong. An old journal was also discovered in the catalyst room, and if what was written inside is to be believed, then we may finally have some truth about who created the House of the Worm, why it was created, and what horrible events triggered its mysterious disappearance and reappearance. His true name has been redacted by the Foundation, and special efforts have been made to maintain secrecy around the house, seeing as it's an anomaly of great interest to a cult known as the Church of the Broken God. So we'll just call the one who made this place the Inventor. Before any of this, the Inventor was one of the many Englishmen traumatized and almost killed in the horrific trench battles of World War I. After a near-death experience, the Inventor, like many geniuses and madmen, was plagued by surreal and nightmarish visions. He saw a huge creature that he referred to as the Worm, a gigantic metal monstrosity with dragon-like jaws full of gnashing gears that rampaged through Europe, destroying and devouring everything in its path. These apocalyptic visions also presented him with a solution, vague blueprints for a machine that might be the salvation of him and others willing to take his new gospel to heart. An escape from a world that the Inventor knew in his heart was about to end. He hired work-starved laborers from across the country to help him make his visions a reality, and began a massive secret construction project beneath his isolated country manor house. For the Inventor, it was all a labor of love. He wanted to protect his wife, son, and daughter from the terrible jaws of the Worm. But as the project stretched on, his wife began to suspect that he'd lost his mind.
Many of his workers, however, felt just the opposite. They became infatuated by the inventor's sermons on the nature of the worm and the coming apocalypse they hoped to escape. Soon enough, they had become a bona fide cult, constructing the elaborate sublevels underneath the house in preparation for the fast-approaching day of reckoning. Then came World War II. The inventor saw Hitler, hungry for war, as one of the avatars of the worm. Finally, knowing that the time was right, he activated the machine and successfully trapped the worm in the bowels of his mechanized home. However, as the Blitz raged and London's bombing began, the inventor felt as though he hadn't stopped anything. He realized once and for all that he was never meant to stop the apocalypse, only escape it. And by throwing the final switch and setting the machine he and his followers had built into overdrive, he did just that. This was the moment that the House of the Worm disappeared, transporting the inventor, his family, and his devoted staff to a different world. An empty gray world, devoid of war but also lacking all the comforts of regular life, including food. Things went downhill from there, as their supplies quickly began to run out, and the cult descended into cannibalism in order to survive. Things weren't going much better in the inventor's personal life. His wife, fearing what would happen to the family, took her own life and the life of his daughter. Though by this point, the inventor's mind was so fractured that it's possible he may have killed them himself. Either way, it was only the inventor and his son left, and more trouble was brewing. Eudora, one of the staff trapped in the building with the inventor and his cult, started a mutiny. She claimed the worm spoke to her from below, and that their only path to salvation was pleasing the worm. How would they please it? A sacrifice, of course. They would give it the son of the man who had trapped it. The mutineers took the inventor's only remaining child and descended into the lowest sublevels. The inventor followed, hoping to track them down, save his son, and salvage something from this nightmare. As he ventured deeper, battling the members of Eudora's new cult, he found that they were changing themselves, becoming the half-human cyborg creatures that the Foundation would later discover. The inventor would find Eudora herself in the speaking tube room. Her body, still living, was wired into the machinery, and she had sacrificed his son to the worm. In a rage, the inventor murdered Eudora, or whatever was left of her, then heard a familiar voice speaking out of a nearby speaking tube. It said, "I am what you have made me. I am then, and I am now. I am choice, and I am tyranny. I am evil, and I am flesh. I am beauty, and I am chaos. I am the worm." The voice was his own. In that terrible moment, the inventor realized that the worm wasn't a giant, all-devouring monster. It was him. In trying to protect his loved one from a perceived apocalypse, he'd brought them all to their horrible demise. He'd trapped them with the monster he'd hoped for them all to escape from, because no matter what you build, you can't escape from who you are. Grief-stricken and broken, the inventor descended into the catalyst room. There was his son, stuck with the syringes, drained of all life to fuel the mighty machine his father had created. In his last moments, the inventor decided to do the only noble thing. He threw himself into the machine, destroying both it and himself in the process. The house was transported back to our own reality, but the worm, in a sense, was no more. But who knows if the worm is really dead? Its thoughts and poisonous intent still lingers in the caverns and rattles through the speaking pipes. Whatever really happened, the Foundation is still picking up the pieces today, and who knows what lurks in the parts still hidden from our knowledge. Now go check out SCP-082 Ferdinand the Cannibal and SCP-2935 O Death for more fascinating, freaky files from the Foundation.